A forbidden tomb opens on a dead world. Inside, ancient Sith Lords lie in eternal stasis, their eyes suddenly flickering open after 5,000 years of darkness. Across the galaxy, a child is born with no father, his power so immense it shatters every instrument designed to measure it. And in the halls of the Jedi Temple, the oldest masters feel a disturbance rippling through the Force, a darkness they thought had been extinguished forever. This is not a tale of heroes and villains. This is the story of how a 1,000-year plan, executed in absolute secrecy, brought the galaxy to its knees. How the Chosen One became the very evil he was prophesied to destroy. How democracy died with thunderous applause, while the Sith Lord who orchestrated it all smiled from his throne. But the story begins much earlier, 25,000 years earlier, with godlike beings reshaping the galaxy itself, with the first Force users discovering powers that would seduce and destroy countless generations, with empires built on slavery, with Jedi fighting Jedi, with secrets buried so deep that uncovering them would shatter everything the galaxy believed to be true. Every empire that rose fell. Every victory planted seeds of future defeat. Every hero carried the potential for corruption. And through it all, the Sith waited in shadows, patient, cunning, knowing that their moment would inevitably come. Tonight we journey through the complete Star Wars Legends timeline. 25,000 years of galactic history, from the ancient Celestials to the distant Legacy era. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. 71% of you watching right now haven't subscribed yet, and hitting that button helps this channel grow tremendously. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our community span across the entire globe. Now dim the lights. Get comfortable under your blanket, and let's begin this epic journey together. You are the eternal witness, the keeper of chronicles, the voice that has watched civilizations rise from stardust and crumble back into the void. You have stood in the presence of gods and watched them fade into myth. You have seen the first spark of the Force awaken in primitive minds, and you have witnessed that same power corrupt the greatest heroes the galaxy has ever known. Tonight, you will recount it all. Every triumph, every tragedy, every moment that shaped the destiny of trillions. Our story begins in a time before time was properly measured. 100,000 years before the Galactic Republic, before the Jedi, before recorded history itself. The galaxy was young, wild, unmapped. Primitive species were just discovering fire, just beginning to look up at the stars and wonder what lay beyond their small worlds. And then came the Celestials. No one knows where they originated. No one knows what they truly were. Some called them gods, others called them architects of reality itself. What is certain is their power. The Celestials possessed abilities that made even the mightiest Force users of later eras seem like children playing with toys they barely understood. They constructed Centerpoint Station, a massive installation capable of moving entire planets through hyperspace, not ships, planets. They could pluck a world from one star system and relocate it to another across the galaxy in moments. The engineering required for such a feat remains beyond comprehension even 25,000 years later. They built the Maw installation, a cluster of black holes positioned with such mathematical precision that they formed a perfect defensive barrier, a region of space so treacherous that no ship could navigate it without being torn apart by gravitational forces. Yet within this deadly maze, they constructed research facilities that floated serenely between the event horizons. The Celestials moved stars themselves. They reshaped hyperspace routes, creating the pathways that later civilizations would use to build their empires. They touched thousands of species, uplifting some, ignoring others, their criteria known only to themselves. And then, at the height of their power, they simply vanished. No wars, no cataclysms, One day they were reshaping the galaxy, and the next they were gone, leaving behind only their monuments and 1,000 unanswered questions. What forced beings of such immense power to abandon everything they had built? Where did they go? And most haunting of all, why did they leave their greatest creation unfinished? The galaxy they left behind fell into darkness. Species the Celestials had uplifted descended into barbarism. The hyperspace routes they had created were forgotten. Their stations drifted in space, silent and empty, waiting for civilizations that would not arise for tens of thousands of years. But from this darkness, a new power emerged. 35,000 years before the Republic, on the oceanic world of Lehon, a species called the Rakata discovered something the Celestials had left behind. They called it the Force, though they did not understand it was the same energy that flowed through all living things. To the Rakata, it was simply power. Raw, intoxicating, infinite power. The Rakata were a brutal species, cunning and cruel. They took the Force and bent it to their will, creating technology that should have been impossible. Their ships ran on dark side energy. Their weapons drew power from hatred and rage. Their computers calculated using Force channeling instead of traditional processing. It was technology and mysticism fused into something the galaxy had never seen before. They called their domain the Infinite Empire, and they built it on the backs of slaves. World after world fell to Rakata conquest. They did not negotiate. They did not offer alliance. They arrived in their Force-powered ships, overwhelmed any resistance with their superior technology, and enslaved entire populations. Hundreds of species across thousands of systems found themselves in chains, forced to build monuments to Rakata glory, forced to serve masters who saw them as nothing more than tools. The Rakata constructed massive pyramids and temples on the worlds they conquered. On Lehon, they built the Star Forge, an enormous space station that could produce infinite fleets of warships by drawing energy directly from nearby stars and filtering it through the dark side. The station fed on death and conflict. The more violence in the galaxy, the more powerful it became. For 10,000 years, the Infinite Empire ruled through fear and force. 10,000 years of slavery. 10,000 years of suffering. 10,000 years of darkness spreading across the stars. But empires built on cruelty carry the seeds of their own destruction. In the year 25,200 before the Republic's founding, a mysterious plague swept through Rakata space. It struck only the Rakata themselves, sparing their slaves. The disease ravaged their population, but worse, it severed their connection to the Force. Suddenly, the technology that had made them invincible stopped working. Their ships fell from the sky. Their weapons went dark. Their empire collapsed within a generation. The enslaved species rebelled. Across thousands of worlds simultaneously, slaves rose up against their weakened masters. The Rakata, once conquerors of the galaxy, were driven back to their homeworld of Lehon. Their civilization devolved into primitive tribes. Their technology scattered and forgotten, their empire reduced to myth. The galaxy was free, but the scars remained, and the technologies they left behind, buried on forgotten worlds, waiting to be rediscovered by civilizations yet to come, would shape the future in ways no one could predict. The Age of Empires was just beginning. The galaxy had learned a terrible lesson from the fall of the Rakata. Power without wisdom breeds only destruction. Technology without ethics becomes a weapon against its creators. For thousands of years after the Infinite Empire's collapse, the civilized worlds existed in isolation, each developing independently, each wary of reaching too far beyond their own star systems. But the Force, that mysterious energy field binding all living things together, could not remain hidden forever. On a verdant world called Tython, far from the old Rakata territories, a group of philosophers and mystics began to sense something extraordinary flowing through the universe around them. 25,793 years before the Galactic Republic would be founded. These Force sensitives established what they called the Jedi Order. The name itself was ancient, meaning mystic center in their language. These were not warriors, not yet. They were scholars, seekers of understanding, individuals who believed that balance was the foundation of all existence. Tython itself seemed to respond to their presence. The planet had two moons orbiting it, Ashla and Bogan, representing the light and dark aspects of the Force. The Jedi built temples on both moons, studying each side with equal reverence. They believed that to deny either aspect was to deny fundamental truth. Light without darkness created blindness. Darkness without light created chaos. Only in balance could true wisdom be found. For centuries, this philosophy held. Jedi traveled between the moons, meditating in temples dedicated to serenity and temples that embraced passion. They taught that emotion was not the enemy, but rather the fuel that powered the Force connection. Control came not from suppression, but from understanding. A Jedi who felt anger did not bury it deep inside where it would fester and corrupt. Instead, they acknowledged it, examined it, learned from it, and then released it. This was the golden age of Force philosophy, a time when the light and dark were not enemies but partners in an eternal dance. But perfection never lasts. Balance is not a destination but a constant struggle, and even the wisest can lose their footing. The trouble began subtly. Some Jedi spent more time on Ashla, the light moon, claiming they felt more at peace there. Others preferred Bogan, arguing that passion and strength came from embracing deeper emotions. What started as preference slowly hardened into ideology. Debates became arguments, arguments became accusations, and accusations became violence. The Force Wars erupted across Tython like a storm that had been building for generations. Jedi who had once meditated together now ignited lightsabers against former friends. Those who embraced only the light believed the Darksiders were corrupting the Order's purity. Those who embraced the darkness accused the Lightsiders of weakness and denial. Tython itself reacted to this imbalance. Massive Force storms ravaged the planet's surface. Lightning struck from clear skies. Earthquakes shattered ancient temples. The world that had once been a paradise of learning became a battlefield soaked in blood and betrayal. When the fighting finally ended, the light-sided Jedi stood victorious. They exiled those who had fallen too deeply into passion and emotion, casting them out beyond known space. And in their victory, they made a decision that would echo through 25,000 years of galactic history. They renamed themselves Jedi, servants of the light only. They declared that the dark side was not to be studied, not to be understood, but to be rejected entirely. Attachment led to jealousy. Jealousy led to anger. Anger led to hatred. And hatred led to suffering. Therefore, attachment itself must be forbidden. Emotion must be controlled, suppressed, denied. The ancient balance philosophy died that day. In its place rose a new doctrine built on purity and restraint. 60 years after the Force Wars ended, representatives from the core worlds gathered on Coruscant to discuss forming a unified government. These were not warriors or mystics, but traders and diplomats who saw the practical benefits of cooperation. Alderaan brought its culture and wisdom. Chandrila offered its agricultural abundance. Corellia contributed its shipbuilding expertise and strategic location along major hyperspace routes. In the year 25,053 before the Battle of Yavin, these worlds signed the Galactic Constitution, formally establishing the Galactic Republic. It was to be a democracy, a union of equals where each member world had a voice in the Senate. Disputes would be settled through debate and voting, rather than warfare. Trade would flow freely between systems. Knowledge would be shared for the betterment of all. The newly renamed Jedi Order relocated their main temple to Coruscant, accepting a role as guardians and peacekeepers for this fledgling government. They would protect the Republic not through armies but through wisdom, negotiation, and when absolutely necessary, the ignition of their lightsabers in defense of the innocent. For 500 years, this arrangement worked beautifully. The Republic expanded steadily, incorporating new worlds through diplomacy rather than conquest. Hyperspace routes mapped by explorers connected distant civilizations, universities, and archives, preserved knowledge from thousands of cultures. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant grew into a magnificent structure of 5 spires reaching toward the sky, a beacon of hope and justice visible from orbit. But beyond Republic space, in territories controlled by the Taiwanese and the Hutts, and in regions still unexplored, darkness was gathering. 24,500 years before the Empire would rise, philosophical disagreements within the Jedi Order erupted into open conflict once again. A group of Jedi began questioning the Council's absolute rejection of emotion and passion. They studied forbidden texts, recovered from pre-Republic civilizations. They experimented with techniques the Council had banned. They argued that the Force had 2 sides for a reason, and denying half of it crippled their true potential. The Council's response was swift and uncompromising. These rogue Jedi were declared heretics. The philosophical debate became a 100-year war as Orthodox Jedi fought to preserve their doctrine against those they now called Dark Jedi. Battles raged across Republic space. Temples were destroyed. Innocent worlds became collateral damage in a conflict over ideology. The Dark Jedi fought with frightening power, using emotions the Orthodox Jedi had spent lifetimes learning to suppress. Their rage fueled devastating Force attacks. Their passion made them unpredictable in combat. Their willingness to embrace the forbidden gave them techniques the traditional Jedi had no defense against. But numbers and resources ultimately decided the war. The Republic backed the Orthodox Jedi with fleets and soldiers. The Dark Jedi, talented as they were, could not stand against an entire government's military might. They were defeated, their leaders executed, their followers scattered. The survivors were given a choice: renounce their beliefs and submit to re-education, or accept permanent exile beyond Republic borders. Most chose exile. They boarded ships and fled into uncharted space, bitter and humiliated, carrying nothing but their hatred for those who had cast them out. For months they drifted through the unknown regions, searching for a world where they could rebuild. Supplies ran low. Hope faded. Some spoke of surrender, of returning to the Republic and accepting whatever punishment awaited them. Then their sensors detected something. A planet in a remote system, its surface predominantly desert and mountain. As they entered orbit, they felt it, a presence in the Force unlike anything they had encountered before. This world practically radiated dark side energy. They named it Korriban, and there, waiting for them, was a civilization that would change the galaxy forever. The native Sith species were humanoid, but distinctively alien. Their skin ranged from crimson to dark red. They had bony facial protrusions and striking yellow eyes, and they were powerful in the Force, having practiced dark side sorcery for thousands of years in complete isolation from the rest of the galaxy. To the Sith, these pale-skinned visitors descending from the sky seemed like gods. The exiled Dark Jedi possessed technology the Sith had never imagined. Lightsabers, starships, knowledge of the greater galaxy. The Sith welcomed them as divine beings, offering them positions of absolute authority. The Dark Jedi accepted without hesitation. Over the following centuries, the exiles intermarried with the Sith species, creating a hybrid culture that combined Jedi training with Sith mysticism. They built massive pyramids and tombs on Korriban, structures designed to focus and amplify dark side energy. They practiced alchemy, using the Force to twist living creatures into monsters, They established a dynastic system where the strongest ruled and the weak served or died. They took the name of the species that had welcomed them. They became the Sith Lords, and they began planning their revenge against the Jedi and the Republic that had exiled them. For thousands of years, they built their civilization in secret. The Republic had no idea they existed. The Jedi believed the Dark Jedi threat had been eliminated forever. But in the unknown regions, an empire was rising. An empire built on passion, on power, on the absolute certainty that the dark side of the Force was not something to be feared or suppressed, but embraced and wielded without restraint. The Sith Empire was patient. They had time, they had resources, and they had something the Republic lacked, a unified vision fueled by hatred and the burning desire for vengeance. The first great schism had planted seeds that would grow into a conflict spanning millennia. The Jedi had won the battle but created an enemy that would never stop, never forgive, never rest until the light side was extinguished and darkness ruled the galaxy. The ancient war between Jedi and Sith, between light and dark, between peace and passion, had truly begun, and it would not end for 25,000 years. 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Jedi Order faced another crisis that would reshape their understanding of the Force and their role in the galaxy. This time, the threat came not from philosophical disagreement but from forbidden experimentation that pushed the boundaries of what the Force should ever be used to accomplish. A group of Jedi had been studying ancient texts recovered from archaeological expeditions to former Rakata worlds. These texts described techniques the Infinite Empire had used to create life, to modify existing creatures, to bend biology itself through dark side manipulation. The Jedi researchers became obsessed with understanding these methods, convincing themselves that knowledge itself was neutral and that studying darkness did not mean embracing it. They were wrong. The experimentation began in secret laboratories hidden on remote worlds. These rogue Jedi used Sith alchemy techniques they had pieced together from fragments of forbidden knowledge. They took ordinary creatures and transformed them into abominations, leviathans, massive serpentine beasts with scales that could deflect lightsaber strikes. Terran takes, hulking monsters specifically engineered to hunt and kill Force users, feeding on their energy. Sith spawn of every variety, each more twisted and dangerous than the last. When the Jedi Council discovered what was happening, they were horrified. These were not philosophical differences that could be debated in temple halls. This was violation of the natural order, perversion of life itself through dark side corruption. The Council declared the experimenters fallen and demanded they cease their work immediately and submit to judgment. The dark experimenters refused. They had gone too far to turn back now. They had touched powers that changed them fundamentally. The darkness they thought they were merely studying had seeped into their souls, convincing them that their research was too important to abandon, that the Council's fear of knowledge was exactly the kind of weakness that held the Jedi Order back from reaching its true potential. What followed became known as the 100-Year Darkness. A century of warfare between Orthodox Jedi and the fallen experimenters who had become something else entirely. The Darksiders unleashed their creations across Republic space. Planets were ravaged by monsters that could not be reasoned with, could barely be killed. Jedi died by the hundreds trying to contain threats their own brothers and sisters had created. The Republic mobilized its full military might in support of the Jedi Council. Fleets bombarded worlds where the dark experimenters had established bases. Ground forces hunted the creatures that had been set loose. Slowly, through overwhelming numbers and resources, the Orthodox Jedi gained the upper hand. The dark experimenters were pushed back system by system. Their creations were hunted down and destroyed. Their laboratories were razed. And when the final battle ended, the survivors faced the same choice their predecessors had been given thousands of years before during the first Great Schism: death or exile. Most chose exile. They gathered what remained of their forces, their most loyal followers, their surviving creatures and artifacts, and fled beyond the borders of known space. The Republic and the Jedi Council were satisfied to see them go, believing that exile to the unknown regions was essentially a death sentence. Let the darkness consume itself out there in the void where it could harm no one else. But the exiles did not die in the unknown regions. Instead, they found something waiting for them, something that had been growing in secret for thousands of years. When their ships emerged from hyperspace into Sith-controlled territory, they were immediately surrounded by a fleet that dwarfed anything they had seen in Republic space. Massive battleships constructed in styles completely unknown to them, weapons that drew power from dark side crystals, and commanding these vessels were beings who radiated force power so intense it was almost painful to sense. The Sith Empire had been waiting. They had known exiles would come eventually. The Jedi always cast out those who sought to understand the full scope of the Force, and the Sith were always ready to welcome them. The new arrivals were brought before the Dark Council on Korriban. There, in tombs and temples that predated the Republic itself, they met the descendants of the first schism's exiles, the Sith Lords who had spent 5,000 years building an empire dedicated to the dark side, the hybrid civilization that had perfected what the experimenters had only begun to explore. The Sith Lords examined these newcomers carefully. They tested their commitment to the dark side. They evaluated their knowledge and their power, and finding them worthy, they welcomed them into the Empire as equals. The fresh Jedi techniques these exiles brought, combined with ancient Sith sorcery, created new possibilities neither group had imagined alone. For the next 2,000 years, the Sith Empire expanded in secret. They conquered world after world in the unknown regions, bringing dozens of species under their dominion. They built temples on Korriban Ziost, Dromund Kasus, each one a monument to dark side power. They codified their philosophy into a creed that would endure for millennia. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. Every word was a rejection of Jedi teaching. Where the Jedi preached serenity, the Sith embraced passion. Where the Jedi sought to control emotion, the Sith weaponized it. Where the Jedi served others, the Sith pursued personal power without apology or restraint. Their society was brutal but honest. The strongest Sith ruled as Dark Lords. The weak served or were eliminated. Treachery was not just accepted but expected. An apprentice who could not eventually overcome their master was not worthy of the title Sith. This constant internal competition made them individually more powerful with each generation, even as it created instability that prevented them from uniting for any extended period. In the year 5000 before the Battle of Yavin, the greatest Sith Lord of the age finally died. Marka Ragnos had ruled the Empire for over a century, maintaining order through sheer power and tactical brilliance. His death created a vacuum that two ambitious Sith Lords rushed to fill. Naga Sadow was a visionary who believed the Sith Empire's destiny lay in conquering the Republic, in revealing themselves to the galaxy, and taking by force what they had been denied. He was charismatic, powerful in the Force, and convinced that the time for hiding had passed. Ludo Kresh represented the conservative faction. He argued for continued isolation, for patience, for building strength before revealing their existence. The Republic was vast and the Jedi were numerous. A premature war could destroy everything the Sith had built over thousands of years. The two factions clashed in brief but savage combat. Sadow emerged victorious, though Kresh survived and retreated with his loyal followers. The Empire was divided, but Sadow controlled enough resources to pursue his vision. Then fate intervened in the form of two hyperspace explorers from Republic space. Gave and Jory Darrigan were siblings, ambitious and desperate, trying to make names for themselves as hyperspace route mappers. They had stolen an old ship and planned to discover new routes that would make them wealthy and famous. Instead, they made a navigational error that sent them into completely uncharted territory. When they emerged from hyperspace, they found themselves in orbit around Korriban, the capital world of an empire the Republic did not know existed, an empire that had spent 5,000 years preparing for war. The Sith forces captured their ship immediately. The siblings were brought before the Dark Council, where Sadao saw in them exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. These explorers could show him the routes back to Republic space. They could provide intelligence about Republic defenses. They were the key that would unlock his destiny. Kresh opposed using them, arguing it would expose the Empire prematurely. The debate became heated, and in the chaos of factional politics, Sadao made his move. He staged an attack that appeared to come from Kresh's forces, using it as justification to execute his rival and seize absolute control of the Empire. With opposition eliminated, Sadao began preparing the invasion fleet. He would use the Darrigan siblings' navigational data to strike at the Republic's heart. He would demonstrate Sith superiority through overwhelming force. He would prove that the dark side was stronger than the light, and that the Jedi's philosophy of restraint had made them weak. But Sadao made one critical miscalculation. He assumed the Republic and Jedi Order had grown soft during their millennia of peace. He believed that 5,000 years of civilization had made them forget how to fight, how to survive, how to do whatever necessary to protect what they had built. He was about to discover that he was catastrophically wrong. The Republic might prefer peace, but when threatened, it could mobilize resources that dwarfed anything the Sith Empire possessed. And the Jedi, for all their talk of serenity and restraint, were still warriors at their core. Warriors who had spent 1,000 years refining their combat techniques. Warriors who would defend the innocent with every ounce of strength they possessed. The Great Hyperspace War was about to begin, and when it ended, the galaxy would be forever changed. The Sith Armada emerged from hyperspace across dozens of Republic worlds simultaneously. No warning, no declaration of war, no opportunity to negotiate or prepare. One moment, the Republic citizens were going about their peaceful lives. The next, the sky burned with ships that belonged in nightmares. Naga Sadao had planned this invasion with meticulous care. His fleet struck shipyards to prevent Republic forces from mobilizing. They hit communication hubs to sow confusion and prevent coordinated defense. They targeted symbols of Republic authority to break civilian morale. This was not just military conquest, this was psychological warfare designed to shatter the Republic's will to resist before they even understood what was happening. The Sith forces brought weapons the Republic had never encountered, battleships powered by meditation chambers where Sith Lords channeled dark side energy directly into the vessel's systems, giving them speed and maneuverability that should have been impossible for ships of that size. Crystal-powered weapons that fired coherent dark side energy capable of overloading shields designed to stop conventional lasers. And most terrifying, the Sith spawn, creatures bred and mutated through alchemy, deployed on planetary surfaces to spread terror and death. What made Sadao's strategy particularly brilliant was his use of Sith illusion techniques. His fleet of 200 ships appeared as 2,000 through force-generated mirages. Republic defenders saw armadas where only squadrons existed, spreading their forces thin, trying to counter threats that were partially phantoms. Every engagement felt like facing overwhelming odds, even when the actual numbers were relatively balanced. The Republic military, designed primarily for peacekeeping and anti-piracy operations, struggled to respond. Their ships were built for patrol and interdiction, not fleet combat against a unified enemy wielding weapons that seemed to violate known physics. System defense forces found themselves isolated and overwhelmed. Desperate calls for help flooded Coruscant, each one more panicked than the last. The Jedi Order mobilized immediately. Masters who had spent decades in peaceful meditation suddenly remembered the combat training that every Jedi received but hoped never to use. Temple archives were open to retrieve ancient battle techniques. Lightsaber forms designed specifically for warfare were taught to Padawans who had trained only for defense and negotiation. Leading the Jedi response was Master Orden one of the oldest and wisest members of the Council. Orden was a Drathos, a long-lived species that aged slowly and accumulated knowledge across centuries. He had studied every conflict in Jedi history, understanding patterns that shorter-lived species might miss. And he possessed a rare force ability called battle meditation, the capacity to influence the flow of combat across entire battlefields through deep concentration in the Force. Orden established himself on Ossus, the ancient Jedi library world that housed 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. From there he coordinated Jedi forces across the Republic, using battle meditation to bolster Republic morale while simultaneously dampening the Sith's combat effectiveness. Soldiers who should have broken and fled found unexpected courage. Pilots who should have panicked in dogfights suddenly felt calm and focused. It was not mind control, nothing so crude. Battle meditation worked by touching the natural courage and skill already present in individuals, amplifying their best qualities while helping them overcome fear and doubt. But battle meditation had limitations. Orden could only influence so many battlefields simultaneously, and the Sith had their own Force users employing dark side techniques to counter his efforts. The war became as much a contest of Force abilities as conventional military might. Empress Teta of the Koros system emerged as another key figure in the Republic's defense, where others saw only disaster. She saw opportunity. The Sith might have superior weapons and dark side powers, but they were operating far from their supply lines while the Republic fought on home territory. Every Sith ship destroyed could not be easily replaced. Every Sith Lord killed represented centuries of accumulated knowledge lost. Teta organized her system's defenses with brilliant tactical acumen. She concentrated forces at strategic choke points rather than trying to defend everything. She prioritized protecting industrial worlds that could produce weapons and ships over agricultural planets that, while important, were not critical to immediate military needs. She made ruthless calculations that saved millions of lives even as they abandoned some systems to Sith occupation. The Sith advance reached Coruscant itself. Sedar's flagship, the massive dreadnought that served as his mobile command center, entered orbit around the Republic capital. The Senate building came under bombardment. The Jedi Temple's lower levels were breached by Sith spawn that had been smuggled to the surface. For terrible hours, it seemed the Republic might fall completely. But the defenders held. Jedi Knights fought room to room in the temple, driving back abominations that should not exist. Republic fleet elements that had been scattered across the galaxy began arriving through hyperspace, reinforcements drawn by the Senate's distress signals. The orbital battle intensified until the space around Coruscant was so filled with debris that navigation became nearly impossible. Sado, seeing his grand invasion stalling, made a desperate decision. He would use Sith sorcery on a scale never before attempted. He would trigger stars themselves to go supernova, destroying entire systems if that's what victory required. His target was the Primus Golud system. Republic forces had been pursuing his fleet there, pressing him harder than any previous engagement. Sado gathered his most powerful Sith Lords in a ritual chamber aboard his flagship. Together, they reached out through the Force to the system's star, destabilizing its fusion processes through dark side manipulation. The results were catastrophic. The star went supernova, its shockwave destroying every ship in the system, Republic and Sith alike. Sado had just killed thousands of his own warriors to eliminate a pursuing fleet. The ruthlessness of the act sent shockwaves through both sides. The Sith were awed and terrified by their Lord's willingness to sacrifice anything for victory. The Republic realized they faced an enemy who would rather destroy the galaxy than accept defeat. But Sado's grand strategy was unraveling. While he focused on spectacular displays of power, Republic intelligence officers had been working on the real problem. They had captured Sith navigators and extracted hyperspace coordinates through interrogation. They knew where the Sith Empire was located. They knew the routes Sado's fleet used to resupply and reinforce. The Republic launched its counteroffensive, a massive fleet assembled at Chorus, combining ships from dozens of systems under unified command. Empress Teta and Odan coordinated the strategy. They would not just push the Sith back, they would follow them home. They would strike at Korriban itself and end this threat permanently. The journey through hyperspace took days. The fleet traveling routes that had not seen Republic ships in millennia. When they emerged in Sith space, they found something unexpected. Ludo Kresh had survived his apparent death. He had been gathering loyalist forces, preparing to overthrow Sado and restore the conservative faction's control of the Empire. Kresh's forces and Sado's fleet were already engaged in combat when the Republic arrived. The three-way battle that erupted in Korriban's orbit was chaos. Kresh's fought both the Republic and Sado simultaneously. Sado tried to destroy the Republic fleet while defending against Kresh's betrayal. The Republic forces, confused by suddenly having two Sith factions to fight, focused on destroying anything that fired at them. Kresh died in the battle, his flagship torn apart by concentrated fire from both Republic and Sado's ships. The conservative Sith Lord, who had warned against revealing the Empire's existence, had been proven catastrophically correct in his final moments. Sado fled. His grand invasion had failed. His empire was in ruins. The Republic fleet was bombarding Korriban, destroying tombs and temples that had stood for thousands of years. Everything he had planned, everything he had sacrificed for, was collapsing around him. With a handful of loyal ships and his most devoted followers, Sado escaped into hyperspace. The Republic tried to pursue, but his navigators used routes through unmapped nebulae and dangerous gravitational anomalies that Republic ships could not safely follow. He vanished into the unknown regions, leaving behind a shattered empire and a Republic that had learned the Sith were far more than ancient history. Sado's fleet eventually arrived at a primitive jungle moon called Yavin 4. The natives there, called Massassi, were simple tribal beings living in basic societies. They had no technology, no concept of the wider galaxy, no understanding of the Force beyond vague spiritual beliefs. Sado used the last reserves of his strength to perform one final great work of Sith alchemy. He transformed the Massassi through dark side rituals, mutating them into powerful warriors. Their bodies became larger, stronger, more resistant to damage. Their lifespans extended through Sith magic. They became the perfect servants, completely loyal, asking no questions, existing only to build and serve. The Massassi constructed massive temples across Yavin 4 under Sado's direction. These were not mere buildings but focusing arrays, structures designed to concentrate and amplify dark side energy. Sado planned to sleep in stasis within the largest temple, preserving himself until the galaxy forgot the Sith had ever existed. Then, in some distant future, he would awaken and begin again. He entered his meditation chamber, surrounded by artifacts and holocrons containing all his accumulated knowledge. The Massassi sealed the temple entrance, and Naga Sado, the Sith Lord, who had nearly conquered the Republic, began a sleep that would last 4,000 years. Back in Republic space, celebrations erupted across thousands of worlds. The Senate commissioned monuments to the fallen. The Jedi Order began cataloging everything they had learned about Sith techniques, determined to understand their enemy better. Korriban was quarantined, its coordinates restricted to prevent curious archaeologists from stumbling into lingering dark side corruption. Ossus received increased funding as scholars worked to preserve every detail of the conflict while memories were still fresh. Masters taught Padawans about the Great Hyperspace War as a cautionary tale, proof that vigilance against the dark side must never waver. 400 years passed. New generations were born who knew the Sith only as historical villains, as remote as the Celestials or Rakata. The galaxy moved forward, building and growing, creating new problems that had nothing to do with ancient Force-wielding empires. But on Yavin 4, sealed in his temple, Naga Sadow dreamed in stasis, and across the galaxy, hidden in places no one thought to look, Sith holocrons waited in the darkness. 400 years passed in relative tranquility. The Republic grew prosperous, expanding into territories that had never known centralized government. The Jedi Order flourished, training new generations in temples across dozens of worlds. Children were brought to Coruscant for instruction in the Force, learning to wield lightsabers and master their connection to the cosmic energy that bound all living things together. The Great Hyperspace War became history, then legend, then barely remembered myth. On Ossus, the great Jedi library world, the archives continued growing. Every conflict, every discovery, every philosophical insight was carefully recorded and preserved. Masters studied ancient texts, seeking wisdom from past generations. Padawans learned from holocrons created by Jedi, who had died centuries before, their knowledge immortalized in glowing blue projections that could answer questions and provide guidance. But history has a way of repeating itself when its lessons are forgotten. In the year 4400 before the Battle of Yavin, a young Jedi named Freedon Nad arrived on Ossus seeking advanced training. He was talented, perhaps too talented for his own good. His connection to the Force was remarkably strong. His lightsaber skills surpassed many knights twice his age, and his hunger for knowledge seemed insatiable. The Masters recognized his potential, but also sensed something troubling beneath his eagerness. There was impatience in him, a desire for power that went beyond simple enthusiasm for learning. When he demanded access to restricted sections of the archives, sections containing information about the dark side and Sith techniques, the Council refused. Their rejection ignited something dangerous in Nad. If the Jedi would not teach him what he wanted to know, he would find knowledge elsewhere. He began sneaking into forbidden areas of the library late at night, reading texts that had been sealed away for good reason. And in those ancient documents, he found references to Naga Sadow and the temples on Yavin 4. Nad stole a ship and fled Ossus before the Council could stop him. He had coordinates extracted from navigational records that were supposed to have been purged centuries ago. The journey took weeks through hyperspace routes that were no longer maintained, through regions of space marked as hazardous and forbidden. When he finally arrived at Yavin 4, the jungle moon appeared peaceful and untouched, but Nad could feel the dark side radiating from the surface like heat from a forge. The Massassi still lived there, their descendants having regressed somewhat from the enhanced warriors Sadow had created, but still bearing traces of Sith alchemy in their blood. They led Nad to the largest temple. The entrance had been sealed for 4 centuries, massive stones locked in place by architectural techniques that seemed impossible without modern technology. But the Force could accomplish what physical tools could not. Nad meditated for 3 days, pouring his will into moving those ancient barriers. Stone ground against stone, dust that had settled for generations swirled into the air, and the tomb opened. Inside, perfectly preserved by Sith alchemy and stasis fields, Naga Sadow waited. His body had not aged a single day, but his consciousness was aware, trapped in the dreamlike state between life and death that powerful Sith Lords could achieve when they refused to let themselves truly die. Sadow's spirit emerged from his corpse like smoke becoming solid. He studied this young fool who had awakened him, this Jedi so hungry for power that he would seek out what his order had forbidden. Perfect. Exactly the kind of vessel the dark side always provided when needed. The training that followed would have broken a weaker mind. Sadow taught Nad every technique he had mastered over his long life. Sith alchemy, to twist living flesh into new forms, Force lightning, to channel hatred into devastating energy. Ancient rituals that could drain the life force from entire populations, and most importantly, the philosophy that had sustained the Sith for millennia. There is no peace, only passion. Through passion comes power. Through power comes freedom. Nad absorbed it all with frightening speed. His Jedi training had given him discipline and control. Now he added passion and ambition to that foundation, becoming something more dangerous than either a Jedi or traditional Sith could be alone. When Sadow had taught him everything, Nad made a decision that would have surprised his master if the ancient Sith Lord had lived long enough to feel surprise. He did not want to be anyone's apprentice. He did not want to share power or wait for his master to grow weak. He wanted to rule now, completely and without question. Nad drained Sadow's remaining life force in a single brutal ritual, consuming 4,000 years of accumulated power in moments. The ancient Sith Lord's body crumbled to dust. His spirit screamed in rage and betrayal before being torn apart and absorbed. And Freedom Nad became the first Sith Lord to exist in the galaxy in 4 centuries. He did not return to Republic space immediately. Instead, he traveled to the Onderon system, a remote region where he could build power without attracting Jedi attention. The planet Onderon had a native population that was divided and desperate, locked in a generations-long conflict they called the Beast Wars. The walled city of Iziz housed the civilized population, descendants of the original colonists who had arrived on Onderon centuries ago. Outside the walls lived the Beast Riders, exiles who had been cast out and learned to survive in the wilderness by taming the dangerous creatures that roamed Onderon's jungles and mountains. The two groups hated each other with the passion of people who share blood but not values. Nad appeared to them as a savior. He used his Sith powers to end the Beast Wars, forcing both sides into submission through demonstrations of Force abilities they had no defense against. He could command their beasts with a thought. He could strike down their champions with lightning from his fingertips. He could enter their minds and make them see whatever he wanted them to see. They crowned him king without hesitation, building him a palace in Iziz that would serve as both throne room and Sith temple. For decades, Nad ruled Onderon openly, making no secret of his use of the dark side. He took no apprentice, trained no successor. He believed he had transcended the old Sith traditions, that he could rule forever through the techniques Sadow had taught him. But even Sith Lords die, eventually. Age caught up with Nad, despite his attempts to use the Force to sustain his body indefinitely. On his deathbed, he realized his mistake. He should have taken an apprentice. He should have ensured the Sith knowledge survived beyond his death. In desperation, he performed one final ritual, binding his spirit to his remains so that he could continue influencing Onderon even after his physical death. For centuries afterward, Nad's ghost haunted the royal bloodline of Onderon. Kings and queens who should have been good rulers found themselves corrupted by whispers only they could hear. The sarcophagus containing Nad's body became a dark side nexus, radiating corruption throughout the palace. The Beast Wars reignited, fueled by dark side influence that neither side understood. The Jedi eventually became aware of the situation. Master Arca Jeth led an intervention team to Onderon in the year 4000 before the Battle of Yavin. What they found disturbed them deeply. The entire planet was saturated with dark side energy. Animals behaved with unnatural aggression. People suffered from nightmares and violent impulses they could not explain. And at the center of it all was Freedon Nad's tomb, still radiating malevolence 400 years after his death. Arca and his team managed to contain the immediate crisis. They moved Nad's sarcophagus from the palace to the moon, Daxon, sealing it in a tomb far from populated areas. They cleansed the palace of its worst corruption. They meditated with the current rulers, helping them resist the dark side whispers that had plagued their family for generations. The Jedi declared victory. They believed they had finally severed Onderon from its dark side contamination. They returned to Coruscant confident that the threat had been neutralized, that Nad's influence had been contained, that the Sith were truly gone now. They could not have been more wrong. On Desun, sealed in his new tomb, Nad's spirit waited with the patience of the dead. He had learned from his mistakes. He would not try to rule directly again. Instead, he would be subtle. He would wait for the right person to find him, someone with the potential to become what he had been and more. And in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a young archaeologist named Exar Kun was beginning his studies. Brilliant, ambitious, and fascinated by Sith history, Kun spent every available moment in the restricted archives, reading everything the Order had collected about the ancient dark side users. His masters noticed his obsession, but dismissed it as academic interest. After all, knowledge itself was not dangerous. Only the application of that knowledge could lead to darkness. The masters assumed knowledge was neutral, that studying darkness did not mean embracing it. They treated Kun's obsession as academic enthusiasm, rather than the first symptom of corruption. On Daxon Moon, in his sealed tomb, Freedon Nad's spirit stirred. He sensed a presence in the Force, someone with the arrogance and hunger necessary to become what he had been. Someone brilliant enough to justify any choice with perfect logic. Someone who believed himself immune to the very corruption that had destroyed everyone before him. The trap was set. The next piece was moving into position, and the Jedi Council, busy with a dozen other concerns across the galaxy, failed to notice that their brightest student was about to become their greatest enemy. Exar Kun was everything the Jedi Order hoped to create in their students. Born with extraordinary force potential, he had been brought to the temple as an infant and raised in the traditions of peace and service. His lightsaber technique was flawless, combining the flowing grace of Form 3 with the aggressive precision of Form 5. His understanding of Force theory surpassed knights who had decades more experience, and his hunger for knowledge seemed to embody the Jedi ideal of constant learning and growth. But his master Vodo Siosk Bas sensed something troubling beneath that perfect exterior. Kun asked questions that went beyond academic curiosity. He wanted to know not just what the Sith had done, but why their techniques worked. He argued that understanding darkness was necessary to truly defend against it. He grew frustrated when the Council refused to let him study certain texts, seeing their caution as fear rather than wisdom. Vodo tried to guide his Padawan toward humility and patience. He created teaching moments designed to show Kun that raw power meant nothing without wisdom and restraint. In one famous training session, Vodo defeated Kun in a lightsaber duel while wielding nothing but a wooden staff, demonstrating that true mastery came from understanding, not strength. Kun learned the wrong lesson. He became obsessed with finding techniques that would make him powerful enough that skill and wisdom would not matter. If he had enough raw force power, he reasoned, he could overwhelm any opponent regardless of their experience or training. His research led him to references about Freedon Nad and the Sith presence on Onderon. Despite explicit council orders forbidding travel to that system, Kun stole a ship and departed Coruscant in secret. He told himself he was going to study the dark side presence there academically, to understand it better so he could defend against it. The lie was so perfect he almost believed it himself. Onderon appeared peaceful when he arrived. The Beast Wars had ended decades ago. The planet had a functioning government and seemed to have recovered from its dark side contamination. But Khun could feel something calling to him from the jungle moon Dixon. A presence in the Force that promised answers to every question the Jedi Council had refused to address. He landed on Daxon to see against the warnings of local authorities and ventured into the jungle alone. The wildlife there was aggressive in ways that suggested unnatural corruption. Creatures that should have fled from a Force user instead attacked with suicidal fury. Plants seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. The very air felt heavy with malevolence. Freedon Nad's spirit had been waiting for exactly this moment. When Khun finally found the tomb, when he used the Force to open the sealed entrance, Nad was ready. The ghost appeared as a wise teacher, offering knowledge and guidance without initially revealing his true nature or intentions. Nad told Kuni about other Sith sites across the galaxy. Korriban, where the ancient tombs held secrets the Jedi had not bothered to fully explore. Yavin 4, where Naga Sadow's temple still stood mostly intact. These places contained knowledge that could elevate Kune beyond anything the Jedi taught. Knowledge that would make him powerful enough to face any darkness without fear. Khun traveled to Korriban, landing on the desolate world where the Sith Empire had been born. The tombs there had been picked over by Jedi archaeological teams after the Great Hyperspace War, but they had been looking for artifacts to destroy, not knowledge to preserve. Khun looked with different eyes, finding hidden chambers the Jedi had missed, recovering holocrons that had been overlooked or deliberately concealed. Each tomb he explored taught him new techniques, Sith alchemy, to enhance his physical abilities, Force lightning, to channel his anger into devastating attacks, ancient meditation practices that promised power beyond anything achievable through Jedi methods. And with each new technique, Nad's ghost was there, encouraging and guiding, slowly eroding Khun's conviction that he was merely studying the dark side rather than embracing it. The transformation was gradual enough that Khun did not realize it was happening. He told himself he was accumulating knowledge, nothing more. He was immune to corruption because he understood what he was doing. The dark side had no power over someone who approached it academically rather than emotionally. Then Nad sent him to Yavin 4, to the temple where Naga Sadow had slept for millennia, to the place where dark side energy was so concentrated that reality itself seemed twisted by its presence. The Masasi still lived there, tribal and primitive but carrying Sith alchemy in their blood from Sadow's ancient modifications. They sensed Khun's power immediately and captured him, dragging him to the largest temple for a ritual their ancestors had performed countless times over the centuries. They placed Khun on an altar, surrounded by focusing crystals that amplified dark side energy. They began a chant in a language that predated the Republic, words that resonated with the Force itself, and they channeled the accumulated dark side energy of 4,000 years directly into Khun's body. The pain was beyond anything he had imagined. It felt like his cells were being torn apart and reassembled, like the Force itself was rewriting his fundamental nature. He tried to resist, tried to use his Jedi training to maintain his identity and beliefs. But the power was overwhelming, and beneath his resistance was a terrible temptation. If he surrendered to this power, if he stopped fighting and embraced what was being offered, he would become more powerful than any Jedi alive. He would have knowledge that the Council kept hidden. He would be free from the restrictions and rules that had always frustrated him. Taxar Khun made his choice. He stopped resisting and welcomed the darkness flooding into him. The transformation completed in moments. His eyes turned golden with dark side corruption. Sith tattoos burned themselves into his skin, marking him as a servant of the ancient order, and his power multiplied exponentially, fed by the concentrated dark side energy of Yavin 4's temples. When Freedon Nad's ghost appeared, expecting to have gained a powerful puppet, Khun surprised him. With a gesture and an act of will fueled by his newly enhanced abilities, Khun destroyed Nad's spirit completely, tearing it apart and absorbing its remaining power. He did not need a dead master whispering instructions. He was Exar Kun, Dark Lord of the Sith, and he would surpass everything that had come before. He would not repeat the mistakes of Sado or Nad. He would not hide on remote worlds or rule small kingdoms. He would return to the Republic and remake it in his image, converting the Jedi themselves to his philosophy and creating an empire that would last forever. The Massassi became his servants, their minds completely dominated by Sith alchemy and Force compulsion. He set them to building more temples, creating a network of dark side focusing arrays that would amplify his power across entire star systems. Yavin 4 would become the center of a new Sith empire, one that would rise not through military conquest, but through the corruption of the Republic's own guardians. While Khun built his power base on Yavin 4, events were unfolding elsewhere that would provide him with the ally he needed. On the civilized worlds of the Empress Teta system, a Jedi Knight named Ulic Qel-Droma was about to make a series of catastrophic decisions driven by good intentions and fatal arrogance. The Krath cult had emerged in the Empress Teta system, led by two spoiled aristocrats named Satul and Alima Keto. They had discovered Sith artifacts in their family's collections and became obsessed with the power these relics represented. Using Sith magic they barely understood, they murdered their parents, seized control of the system, and began recruiting other nobles into their dark side cult. The crisis spread like a plague through Empress Teta's upper classes. What began as wealthy dilettantes playing with dangerous artifacts became a genuine threat as Sith techniques allowed them to dominate entire planetary governments. They declared independence from the Republic, establishing a dark side regime that the Jedi could not ignore. Ulic Qel-Droma proposed a bold plan. He would infiltrate the Krath, pretending to join them while secretly working to dismantle the cult from within. His lover, the Jedi Knight Nomi Sunrider, begged him not to go. His brother Kay warned that the dark side did not care about good intentions. Master Arca Jeff, who had once cleansed Onderon of Nad's influence, counseled patience and a more measured approach. Ulic ignored them all. He was strong enough to resist corruption. He understood the dark side well enough to fake allegiance without actually falling. He would succeed where others had failed because he was special, powerful, destined for greatness. The Krath saw through his infiltration immediately. They had been expecting Jedi intervention and had prepared specifically for someone trying Ulic's exact strategy. They captured him within days of his arrival, and what followed was a descent into darkness that proved how little Ulic had understood about the true nature of the dark side. They did not try to convert him through argument or seduction. They used Sith poison, a substance that physically altered brain chemistry and Force connection. They tortured him with techniques designed not just to cause pain, but to channel that pain into dark side power. They broke him down systematically, stripping away his identity and beliefs until only raw suffering remained. Ulic tried to maintain his Jedi calm, his commitment to peace and serenity, but the Sith poison made meditation impossible. Every attempt to center himself in the Force brought only more pain. His connection to the light side withered as the corruption spread through his cells, and slowly, terribly, he began to embrace the dark side, not because he believed in it, but because it was the only thing that made the suffering stop. When he finally gave in, when he began using dark side techniques to lash out at his torturers, he felt relief for the first time in weeks. The pain receded, his power surged, and he realized with horror that he was no longer pretending to be a dark sider. He had become one. The Krysi welcomed him as a true convert. Alima Keto took him as her lover and war leader, and Ulic, unable to face what he had become, told himself that he could still complete his mission. that he was just going deeper undercover, that he could pull himself back from the darkness whenever he chose. But the dark side does not let go of those it claims so easily. With each day, with each act of violence committed in the Krath's name, Ulick sank deeper. The rationalizations became easier, the cruelty became natural, and the Jedi he had been faded like a dream upon waking. When Exar Kun sensed another powerful Darksider emerging in Republic space, he traveled to Empress Teta to either eliminate a rival or gain an ally. He found Ulick leading Krath forces in battle, wielding dark side powers with frightening skill. The two Dark Lords met in the ruins of a destroyed government building, surrounded by the devastation their respective paths had created. They ignited their lightsabers and clashed with the full power of the dark side behind every strike. The duel destroyed everything around them. Buildings collapsed from errant force blasts. The ground cracked from the pressure of their power. Neither could gain advantage over the other. And then the ancient Sith Lords intervened. The ghost of Marka Ragnus, who had died 5,000 years ago but whose spirit endured in the Force, manifested before them. He declared them both worthy. They would not fight as rivals but as master and apprentice, forming a brotherhood of Sith that would succeed where previous Dark Lords had failed. Ragnos marked them with Sith brands, burning symbols into their skin that proclaimed them servants of the dark side. Exar Kun was named Dark Lord, the master who would lead through vision and power. Ulick Kaeldroma became the apprentice, the war leader who would command armies and destroy the Republic's military might. The Great Sith War had begun, and this time, the Sith would not be invaders from the unknown regions. They would be the Republic's own children, Jedi, who had fallen and now sought to drag their entire order down into darkness with them. Exar Kun and Ulick Kaeldroma began their campaign with a strategy that terrified the Jedi Council more than any military invasion could. They did not attack the Republic with armies. They attacked the Jedi Order itself, targeting the brightest and most powerful students, offering them freedom from the restrictions of the code and power beyond anything their masters would teach them. The recruitment campaign was devastatingly effective. Kuna traveled to Jedi academies across the galaxy, appearing to students who felt frustrated by the slow pace of their training or resentful of the Council's restrictions. He did not need to lie. He simply showed them what they could become if they stopped limiting themselves with rules about attachment and emotion. Among the fallen were some of the Order's most promising knights. Krydo, who had been one of Ulick's closest friends, joined the Brotherhood out of jealousy and a twisted desire to prove himself equal to his former companion. Oswillim, a talented archaeologist, saw in Kun's teachings the kind of unrestricted knowledge he had always craved. Dozens more followed, each believing they were making a choice that would elevate them rather than damn them. Ulick brought a different resource to the Brotherhood. The Krysi forces gave them military might and political control of several systems, but Ulick's true masterstroke was recruiting the Mandalorian Crusaders. The Mandalorians were a warrior culture that valued strength and honor above all else. They had been raiders and mercenaries for generations, but their greatest warriors remembered a time when Mandalorians had been conquerors, when they had carved out empires through sheer martial prowess. Mandalore the Indomitable, their current leader, was exactly the kind of ambitious warrior Ulick needed. Ulick challenged Mandalore to single combat, defeating him soundly but sparing his life. Impressed by both Ulick's skill and his willingness to show mercy when he could have simply killed a potential threat, Mandalore swore his clans to the Sith cause. Suddenly the Brotherhood had not just Force users but thousands of elite warriors whose combat abilities were legendary across the galaxy. The combined forces struck at the heart of the Republic. Coruscant itself came under assault in an attack that should have been impossible. The Republic's defenses were designed to repel external invasions, fleets arriving from hyperspace with clear hostile intent. They were not prepared for enemies who walked through the Senate building's front doors wearing the robes of Jedi. Kun's fallen Jedi struck from within, while Mandalorian commandos breached the Senate's security through tactics and equipment that overwhelmed guards trained to handle political protesters, not elite special forces. The attack lasted only hours, but the psychological damage was catastrophic. If the capital itself was not safe, nowhere in the Republic could claim security. Ulic personally dueled his former master in the Senate chambers, a fight that ended with the older Jedi's death. As his master fell, Ulic felt a moment of horrified clarity. He had just murdered the man who had trained him, guided him, believed in him when others doubted. But that moment of regret was drowned by Alima Keto's voice praising his strength, by the rush of dark side power that came with victory, by Keto's approval transmitted through their force bond. The regret faded, the rationalization returned, and Ulic sank even deeper into darkness, each act of violence making it easier to commit the next. The Jedi Order mobilized every available knight and master. This was not a distant threat that could be contained through careful planning. This was an existential crisis that demanded immediate and overwhelming response. Jedi across the galaxy abandoned their posts and converged on assembly points, forming battle groups that would carry the fight directly to the Sith. But Kun had anticipated this. He had studied the Jedi for years, understanding not just their strengths but their weaknesses. Their commitment to protecting innocent life made them predictable. Their unwillingness to accept collateral damage limited their tactical options, and their emotional attachments to each other could be exploited. The Sith forces struck at Ossus. The ancient library world, repository of 10,000 years of accumulated Jedi knowledge, became the target of an attack designed not just for military advantage, but for symbolic devastation. If the Jedi lost Ossus, they lost their institutional memory, their connection to past wisdom, their ability to learn from previous mistakes. Kuni employed a technique that demonstrated both his power and his willingness to embrace atrocity. Using Sith sorcery on a massive scale, he reached out through hyperspace to the Chron cluster, a grouping of 10 stars relatively close to Ossus. Through dark side manipulation that should have been impossible, he destabilized all 10 stars simultaneously, triggering a chain reaction of supernovas. The shockwave would take days to reach Ossus, giving the Jedi time to evacuate, but not enough time to save everything. The Council made desperate calculations, people first, always, then holocrons containing unique knowledge that existed nowhere else, then artifacts of cultural significance, then everything else they could possibly fit on whatever ships were available. Master Odan Ure, who had fought in the Great Hyperspace War centuries ago and lived to see this new conflict, coordinated the evacuation with the same tactical brilliance he had shown against Naga Sado. He saved tens of thousands of lives through pure organizational genius, getting people off the planet who would have died without his leadership. But he could not save himself. In the final hours before the shockwave arrived, as the last evacuation ships were launching, Sith forces struck the library directly. Kund himself led the assault, seeking specific holocrons that contained techniques he wanted for himself. Odan confronted him. Ancient Jedi Master versus fallen prodigy, experience versus raw power. The duel was brief. Odan was centuries old, and his body could not match Khan's enhanced abilities. But before Khan struck the killing blow, the old master used the last of his strength to hide certain holocrons using force techniques the Sith Lord could not detect. Knowledge that Khan sought would remain beyond his reach, buried in locations that only other Jedi might eventually find. Odan died protecting knowledge, as he had lived protecting people. His death marked the end of an era. He had been a living link to the Republic's earliest days, a being whose lifetime spanned conflicts that others knew only from history books. With him died irreplaceable wisdom that could never be fully recovered. The Chron cluster's shockwave arrived hours later. Ossus's surface was scoured by radiation and stellar debris. The great library burned, millennia of accumulated knowledge reduced to ash in moments. Jedi who had risked staying too long, trying to save one more artifact, one more text, one more piece of their heritage, were caught by the destruction and died in fire that fell from the sky. The loss devastated the Order. They had saved perhaps 10% of Ossus's archives. The rest was simply gone. Knowledge that had taken generations to accumulate lost in a single catastrophic event. Records of ancient conflicts, philosophical treatises that had guided Jedi for thousands of years, techniques and wisdom from Force users whose traditions predated the Republic itself, all of it destroyed by one fallen Jedi's application of forbidden Sith sorcery. But the destruction of Ossus proved to be a turning point in an unexpected way. The sheer scale of the atrocity shocked even some of the Brotherhood's members. This was not about freedom from restrictive rules or access to forbidden knowledge. This was genocide of knowledge itself, deliberate destruction of irreplaceable heritage. Some of the fallen Jedi began questioning whether this was truly the path they wanted to follow. Ulic Qel-Drom's crisis came not from the destruction but from a personal tragedy. His brother Kay had joined the Jedi forces trying to stop the Sith, hoping to reach Ulic to remind him of who he had been before the corruption. The brothers met on a battlefield, and in the chaos of combat fueled by dark side rage and not fully recognizing who he was fighting, Ulic killed Kay with his lightsaber. The realization came moments after the fatal blow. Ulic looked down at his brother's body, saw Kay's face frozen in an expression of sad understanding rather than hatred, and felt the dark side's grip on his mind crack. This was not strength, this was not power, this was just murder, and he had killed the person who loved him most in the galaxy. Nomi Sunrider arrived moments later with a Jedi strike team. She had been Ulic's lover before his fall, had begged him not to go to Empress Teta, had spent months trying to find a way to redeem him. Now she looked at him standing over Kay's corpse and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Using a rare and dangerous Force technique, she severed Ulic's connection to the Force completely. In an instant, he went from being one of the most powerful Force users alive to being completely cut off from the energy field he had known since childhood. The sudden absence was like going blind and deaf simultaneously, a sensory deprivation so profound that Ulic collapsed, unable to even stand without the Force presence he had relied on, unconsciously his entire life. The Sith forces retreated without him. Kun made no attempt to rescue his apprentice. A Sith who had been defeated and captured was useless, and Kun had never actually valued Ulic as anything more than a useful tool. The Mandalorians, however, were loyal to the warrior code. They recovered Ulic's body and delivered him to Republic custody rather than abandoning him on the battlefield. Ulic's trial became a galactic spectacle. Here was a fallen Jedi, powerless and broken, who had murdered thousands, including his own brother and master. The Senate wanted execution. Many Jedi agreed, but some argued for mercy, pointing out that Ulic had been corrupted through torture and Sith poison rather than simple moral failure. The trial never reached a conclusion. Assassins, likely sent by surviving Krath elements who feared what Ulic might reveal, attacked the courtroom. In the chaos, Ulic escaped with help from unexpected allies who believed he deserved a chance at redemption rather than execution. With Ulic gone and many of his fallen Jedi questioning their choices after Ossus, Kun stood increasingly alone. The Brotherhood was fracturing. The Republic had recovered from its initial shock and was mobilizing resources that dwarfed anything the Sith could match. And the Jedi, despite their losses, had unified in a way they had not since the Great Hyperspace War. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Jedi could not allow Kun to remain free, not after what he had done, not with the knowledge he possessed. They assembled the largest force working in their history, hundreds of Jedi across dozens of worlds linking their power through battle meditation and ancient rituals. Kaan felt them coming, felt the weight of the entire Jedi Order's combined strength focusing on Yavin 4. He knew he could not survive this through conventional means, but he had one final technique, one ultimate expression of Sith power that would ensure his survival even if his body died. He gathered the Massassi in the temple chambers. These beings had served him loyally, building his temples and obeying his every command without question. Now he would use them for their ultimate purpose. Through a ritual of unspeakable cruelty, Kaan drained the life force from every Massassi on Yavin 4 simultaneously. Thousands of beings died in moments, their energy channeled into a Sith spell that would preserve Kaan's consciousness even as his body perished. When the Jedi's combined force attack struck, it found Kaan's physical form and destroyed it utterly. His body was torn apart by the concentrated light side energy of hundreds of Jedi working in perfect harmony. But his spirit, anchored by the death energy of the Massassi and bound to the temples through ancient Sith techniques, survived. Kaan's consciousness became trapped within the very stones of his temples, unable to move or act but aware and waiting. The Republic began its long recovery. Worlds devastated by the war received aid and reconstruction resources. The Senate passed reforms designed to prevent future conflicts of this scale. New defense networks were established, new protocols for identifying dark side corruption implemented. The Jedi Order faced a different kind of rebuilding. They had lost not just members, but innocence. The certainty that their training made them immune to the dark side had been shattered. Councils debated new restrictions, new safeguards, new ways to identify vulnerable students before corruption could take root. Ulic Qel-Droma eventually found a measure of redemption, teaching younglings about the seductive nature of the dark side, despite having no Force connection himself. He died years later, killed by a random spacer who had no idea who he was, dying peacefully with his brother's forgiveness finally accepted. And on Yavin 4, overgrown by jungle and forgotten, Exar Kun's consciousness remained trapped in stone. 4,000 years of absolute isolation stretched ahead of him. No movement, no sensation, just awareness and memory and the slowly building madness of a mind with nothing to do but relive its mistakes across centuries. The galaxy continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, unaware that this particular darkness had not been destroyed, but merely imprisoned, waiting for the day when ignorance or ambition would break those seals and release him once more. 20 years after the Great Sith War ended, the galaxy faced a threat that had nothing to do with the Force or ancient philosophies. The Mandalorians, scattered and leaderless after Mandalore the Indomitable's death, had reorganized under a new leader who saw opportunity in the Republic's focus on recovery rather than defense. Mandalore the Ultimate was different from his predecessor, where the Indomitable had been a warrior seeking glory through combat. The Ultimate was a strategist who understood that true conquest required more than individual battles won. He transformed the Mandalorian clans from raiders and mercenaries into a unified war machine with a singular purpose, proving Mandalorian superiority by conquering the Republic itself. The Neo-Crusaders, as they called themselves, adopted standardized armor and equipment, abandoning the individualistic traditions that had previously defined Mandalorian culture. Every warrior wore the same style of Beskar armor, painted in colors denoting rank and specialization. They trained together, fought together, operated with military precision that previous Mandalorian forces had lacked. Their invasion began in the Outer Rim, far from Coruscant's notice. Small colonies disappeared overnight, their populations killed or enslaved. Mining operations were seized for their resources. Shipyards fell under Mandalorian control. Their production immediately converted to building more warships for the Crusade. By the time the Republic Senate recognized the pattern, the Mandalorians controlled dozens of systems and were advancing toward more populated regions with terrifying speed. Taris fell after a brutal siege that left millions dead. Vanquo was conquered through orbital bombardment that cracked the planet's crust. Sirocco suffered nuclear strikes that rendered entire continents uninhabitable for generations. The Jedi Council faced an impossible decision. The Republic begged for their intervention, for the Jedi to lead military forces against the Mandalorian threat as they had against the Sith. But the Council hesitated, sensing something larger at work, a pattern they could not quite identify, but knew existed just beyond their understanding. Council meetings stretched for hours as masters debated the correct course. Some argued for immediate action, pointing out that every day of delay meant more deaths, more suffering. Others counseled patience, insisting that rushing into war without understanding the deeper forces at play would lead to disaster. Young Jedi Knights grew frustrated with the Council's inaction. They saw refugees flooding into core worlds, families torn apart, children orphaned by Mandalorian attacks. The philosophical debates happening in the temple seemed like cowardice when measured against the screams of the dying. Among the frustrated was a Jedi named Revan, brilliant, charismatic, and blessed with a tactical mind that rivaled the greatest military commanders in galactic history. Revan could not accept the Council's wait-and-see approach. When studying battle reports, Revan saw patterns the Republic military missed, identified weaknesses in Mandalorian strategy that could be exploited, understood how to turn their strengths against them. Revan went before the Council and argued passionately for intervention. The Mandalorians were systematically destroying everything the Republic stood for. Entire species were being driven to extinction. Cultures that had existed for thousands of years were being erased. How could the Jedi claim to be guardians of peace while standing idle as genocide unfolded across the Outer Rim? The Council's answer was firm. They sensed greater forces manipulating events, and until they understood what those forces were, the Order would not commit to war. Patience was not cowardice. Caution was not weakness. Sometimes the greatest courage lay in refusing to act until the correct action revealed itself. Revan left the Council chambers convinced that the Masters had grown too detached, too focused on cosmic mysteries to care about the real suffering of real people dying in real time. If the Council would not act, Revan would defy them. The young Jedi was not alone. Alec, Revan's closest friend, stood ready to follow wherever this path led. Mitra Surik, a talented commander whose tactical abilities complemented Revan's strategic genius, joined without hesitation. Dozens more followed, Jedi who could not reconcile their vows to protect the innocent with orders to do nothing while innocents died. They called themselves Revanchists, a name that meant those who seek justice for wrongs committed. The Republic military, desperate for any advantage against the Mandalorian onslaught, welcomed them with open arms. Suddenly, forces that had been losing ground for months began winning battles. Revan's tactical innovations turned the tide of engagement after engagement. The war became personal when Revan challenged Mandalore the Ultimate directly. The two met on a battlefield already littered with the dead, surrounded by the wreckage of ships and weapons that had failed to determine victory. Mandalore fought with the skill of a warrior who had never known defeat, but Revan fought with something more, a connection to the Force that elevated combat into art. When Mandalore fell, Revan did something unexpected. Rather than simply claiming victory, Revan took Mandalore's mask, the symbol of leadership that defined whoever wore it as the supreme commander of all Mandalorian forces. Without the mask, there could be no new Mandalore. Without a Mandalore, the clans would fracture and disperse. The Mandalorian forces broke immediately. Warrior culture demanded they follow strength, and their strongest had fallen. Some tried to continue fighting, but without unified command, they were easily defeated or scattered. Within weeks, a war that had consumed the galaxy for over a decade simply ended. But Revan's war did not end on that battlefield. During the final campaigns, while pursuing Mandalorian remnants into the unknown regions, Revan discovered something that changed everything. On the Sith world of Malachor V, in an ancient academy hidden beneath the planet's shattered surface, Revan found evidence that made the entire Mandalorian war suddenly make horrifying sense. The war had been orchestrated. The Mandalorians had been manipulated into attacking the Republic by a Sith empire that still existed in the unknown regions, an empire that had been building strength in secret for thousands of years. The Emperor who ruled this hidden empire, a being of immense power who had achieved practical immortality, had used the Mandalorians as a test, evaluating the Republic's military capabilities and identifying weaknesses to exploit in a future invasion. Revan understood with terrible clarity that the Republic was not ready for what was coming. The true Sith Empire, as this hidden power called itself, possessed resources and knowledge that would overwhelm the Republic's defenses. The Jedi Order, still recovering from the Great Sith War, and now fractured by the Council's refusal to fight the Mandalorians, could not stand against this threat. A desperate plan formed in Revan's mind. The Republic needed to be stronger, more unified, more prepared for total war, and there was only one way to force that kind of transformation quickly enough. The Republic needed to be conquered by someone who understood what was coming, someone who could reorganize it into a power capable of resisting the true Sith. Revan would become that conqueror, would take the dark side power necessary to dominate the Republic, use it to transform the government into something that could survive the coming storm, and then, when the true Sith arrived, be ready to fight them with everything the dark side offered. It was a plan born from desperation and arrogance in equal measure. Revan genuinely believed it was possible to use the dark side as a tool without being consumed by it, to touch corruption while remaining fundamentally uncorrupted, to wield evil in service of a greater good. The discovery of the Starforge seemed to validate this thinking. On the ancient Rakata homeworld of Leon, Revan found a space station that represented the pinnacle of that extinct empire's technology. The Starforge could produce ships and weapons at impossible speeds, drawing energy from nearby stars and filtering it through the dark side to create matter from nothing. With the Starforge, Revan could build a fleet large enough to conquer the Republic quickly, minimizing casualties and destruction. The conquered systems would be integrated into a new empire strong enough to face the true Sith. It was logical. It was necessary. It was the only way to save the galaxy from a threat no one else even knew existed. Revan and Malak, who had taken a new name in the Sith tradition, declared themselves Dark Lords and began their campaign. But Revan's grand strategy immediately encountered a problem the plan had not accounted for. The dark side was not a tool. It was a corrosive force that twisted everything it touched, including intentions and beliefs. The careful conquest designed to minimize harm became brutal as Malak's influence grew. The temporary use of dark side power became addiction as both Sith Lords felt its seductive strength. The plan to eventually turn against the true Sith faded as building their own empire became an end in itself rather than a means to an end. Revan tried to maintain control, tried to remember the original purpose. Systems were conquered with surgical precision when possible, infrastructure preserved, populations converted rather than destroyed. But Malak grew increasingly bloodthirsty, seeing their mission not as preparation for a greater war, but as the rightful dominance of the strong over the weak. The apprentice's betrayal came during a Jedi strike team's assault on Revan's flagship. Bastila Shan, a young Jedi with the rare ability called battle meditation, led the boarding party. They fought their way to Revan's command center, lightsabers blazing against Sith defenses. Malak saw opportunity in the chaos. He ordered his own ships to fire on Revan's bridge, intending to kill both the Jedi strike team and his master in one ruthless act. The bombardment tore through shields and hull, explosions ripping apart the command deck. A Stealer found Revan's body in the wreckage, barely alive, mind shattered by the physical and psychic trauma. She formed a force bond to preserve what remained of Revan's life, an emergency measure that created a connection neither of them wanted or understood. The Jedi Council faced an ethical nightmare. They held Darth Revan, one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, completely helpless and at their mercy. Execution would be the practical choice. Imprisonment risked eventual escape, but there was a third option, one that troubled many masters even as they recognized it might be necessary. They wiped Revan's memory entirely, implanting a false identity as a Republic soldier. The tactical genius that had won the Mandalorian Wars would now serve the Republic again, but without the Sith knowledge or dark side corruption. It was mind violation on a profound scale, but they justified it as necessary for the greater good. Malak declared himself the new Dark Lord and abandoned Revan's original strategy entirely. He did not care about the true Sith or preparing the Republic for future threats. He wanted power for its own sake, wanted to rule because he could, wanted to prove himself greater than the Master who had always overshadowed him. The Jedi Civil War had begun, and the tragedy was that it started from good intentions twisted into darkness, from a genuine attempt to save the galaxy that became the very threat it had meant to prevent. The being who would become the Sith Emperor was born on the agricultural world of Nathema with the name Tenebrae. From his first moments of consciousness, he was different. At age 6, he could move objects with his mind. At 8, he could dominate the wills of adults with a glance. At 10, he murdered his father, a brutal man who had ruled their plantation through fear, and took control of everything the man had owned. The dark side recognized Tenebrae as something extraordinary. He did not discover the Force gradually or train to use it. He simply knew, as if the knowledge had been written into his very cells. By the time he reached adolescence, he ruled the entire planet through a combination of Force domination and strategic cruelty that made resistance seem pointless. When Dark Lord Marco Ragnos visited Nathema during a tour of Sith territories, he found a 13-year-old boy who radiated more dark side power than Sith Lords with centuries of experience. Impressed and perhaps slightly unnerved, Ragnos granted the boy the title of Sith Lord, a recognition that typically took decades of service to earn. Tenebrae continued expanding his power for decades, content to rule Nathema while studying Sith techniques and developing abilities that pushed beyond anything in the archives. He learned that death was not inevitable, that the Force could be manipulated to sustain consciousness indefinitely. He discovered that life force itself could be transferred, consumed, used as fuel for techniques that should have been impossible. When the Great Hyperspace War ended in catastrophic defeat for the Sith Empire, when Naga Sadow fled, and the Republic forces began hunting surviving Sith Lords, Tenebrae saw opportunity rather than disaster. Desperate Sith would do anything for survival, including things they would never consider in times of strength. He sent messages across what remained of the Empire, calling 8,000 Sith Lords to Nathema with promises of a ritual that would grant them the power to destroy the Republic and reclaim their dominance. They came because they had no better options, because Tenebrae's reputation as a dark side prodigy gave them hope, because even a small chance of victory was better than certain death. The ritual Tenebrae designed was the most ambitious act of Sith sorcery ever attempted. It required perfect timing, absolute control, and a willingness to commit atrocity on a scale that surpassed anything in galactic history. When the 8,000 Sith Lords gathered in a vast circle, channeling their power as Tenebrae directed, they believed they were participating in a weapon that would strike at the Republic from across the galaxy. Instead, Tenebrae turned the ritual inward. The technique he had designed did not project power outward, but drew it into himself. The 8,000 Sith Lords realized their mistake in the final seconds before their lives were drained completely, their combined force energy and life essence torn from their bodies and absorbed by the being at the center of the ritual. But Tenebrae did not stop with the Sith. The ritual, once initiated, expanded across the entire planet. Every human, every animal, every plant, every microorganism on Nathema died simultaneously, their life force consumed to fuel an ascension that transformed a powerful Sith Lord into something that had never existed before. When the ritual completed, Tenebrae stood alone on a world that was now a void in the Force itself. Nathema had become a wound, a place where the Force did not exist because all life had been consumed. The planet's surface remained intact, buildings and geography unchanged, but nothing living could survive there. It was death made permanent, a scar on reality that would never heal. Tenebrae had achieved functional immortality. His body no longer aged. His power had multiplied beyond any previous Sith Lord's capabilities, and his consciousness had expanded in ways that made mortal concerns seem trivial and beneath consideration. He renamed himself Emperor, claiming authority over all Sith, and set about rebuilding the Empire in secret. The Republic believed the Sith had been destroyed, which suited his purposes perfectly. He gathered the survivors of Naga Sado's forces, refugees and remnants scattered across the unknown regions, and led them to the world of Dromund Kaas. There, hidden by nebulae and gravitational anomalies that made navigation treacherous for anyone who did not know the safe routes, the Emperor built a new Sith civilization. For 1,300 years, the true Sith Empire grew in absolute secrecy. Planets were conquered in regions the Republic had never explored. Armies were trained in tactics the Republic had never encountered. Weapons were developed using Sith alchemy and technology in combinations that created devastating new capabilities. The Emperor's grand strategy required patience on a scale that mortal beings could barely comprehend. Centuries were just moments in his perception. The rise and fall of dynasties were minor fluctuations in a plan that spanned millennia. He manipulated from the shadows, his hand invisible even to most of his own empire. The Mandalorian Wars were his design. He had agents make contact with Mandalore the Ultimate, whispering suggestions that the warrior's pride transformed into certainty. The idea to test the Republic's strength, to evaluate their military capabilities and identify weaknesses, came from the Emperor even though Mandalore believed it was his own strategic insight. Revan's discovery of this manipulation on Malachor V was exactly what the Emperor had anticipated. A brilliant, arrogant Jedi finding evidence of a greater threat would react predictably. Revan would try to prepare the Republic through conquest, would turn to the dark side, while believing the corruption was controlled and temporary, would become a weapon the Emperor could eventually turn to his own purposes. When Revan finally traveled into the unknown regions seeking the true Sith Empire, the Emperor was ready. Revan was captured within hours of entering Imperial space, brought before the Emperor in chains, and subjected to techniques that made ordinary torture seem merciful by comparison. The Emperor did not simply want to kill Revan. He wanted to understand how someone could touch the dark side while retaining enough clarity to pursue strategic goals rather than descending into simple cruelty and hunger for power. This was useful, a technique worth studying and potentially replicating. For 300 years, Revan remained the Emperor's prisoner. The Sith Lord's mind was invaded repeatedly, memories extracted and examined, techniques analyzed and recorded, but the Emperor discovered something unexpected. Revan's will was strong enough that complete domination was impossible. The prisoner's consciousness split, light and dark aspects separating as a defense mechanism against total corruption. The Emperor decided this division was even more useful than complete control. He could feed on the conflict between Revan's light and dark halves, drawing power from the internal struggle. Revan became a battery, a source of force energy that the Emperor could drain whenever needed, sustaining his immortality and fueling his techniques without requiring additional rituals or sacrifices. Meanwhile, the Emperor prepared his invasion. In the year 3681 before the Battle of Yavin, the true Sith Armada emerged from the unknown regions and struck the Republic with overwhelming force. This was not the relatively small invasion Naga Sado had led 5,000 years earlier. This was the full might of an empire that had spent over a millennium preparing for this moment. The Great Galactic War lasted 28 years, longer than any previous conflict in galactic history. The Emperor's strategy was methodical. He did not seek quick victory, but rather the systematic destruction of everything that gave the Republic strength. Shipyards were destroyed to prevent fleet replacement. Industrial worlds were conquered to deny resources. Cultural centers were razed to break morale. The Sith were not interested in ruling the Republic. They wanted to hollow it out, to transform it into a shell that would collapse from within. Political manipulation was as important as military conquest. Sith agents infiltrated the Senate, sowing discord and paranoia. They turned Republic members against each other, creating internal conflicts that were almost as destructive as the external war. The sacking of Coruscant demonstrated the Emperor's true genius for cruelty. While his diplomats negotiated peace terms on Alderaan, his military forces assaulted the Republic capital. The Jedi Temple burned. The Senate building was occupied. Thousands died in hours, while the Republic's leaders were trapped in peace talks, light years away, unable to return in time to make any difference. The Treaty of Coruscant that followed was humiliation codified into law. The Republic surrendered dozens of systems. They acknowledged the Sith Empire as a legitimate government with equal standing. They agreed to restrictions on military buildup that would keep them weak for generations. And the Jedi were blamed for failing to prevent the disaster. Their political influence shattered. The Cold War that followed was exactly what the Emperor wanted. Both sides were exhausted, unable to resume open warfare, but constantly preparing for its inevitable return. Proxy conflicts kept tensions high. Espionage and assassination maintained fear and paranoia. The galaxy existed in a state of permanent crisis that prevented any real recovery or growth. The Emperor, however, had grown bored with conventional conquest. Ruling the Sith Empire was tedious. Managing the Cold War was beneath him. His thoughts turned to something more ambitious, more worthy of his power and immortality. He began developing a ritual that would make his ascension on Nathema seem trivial by comparison. This technique would not just consume one planet, but the entire galaxy. Every living thing, from the most primitive bacteria to the most advanced civilizations, would be drained of life force simultaneously. The energy would transform him into something beyond even his current state, perhaps even beyond the Force itself. But such a ritual required setup that would take centuries. It required positioning pieces across the galaxy without anyone understanding the pattern until too late. It required a level of patience and planning that only an immortal mind could sustain. The Emperor created a secondary identity on the hidden world of Zakuul, ruling there as Valkorian, while his primary consciousness continued managing the Sith Empire. This division of attention was possible because his power had grown so immense that running two civilizations simultaneously was barely an inconvenience. Revan's rescue came at the worst possible moment for the Emperor's plans. A strike team of Republic and Imperial agents working together in rare cooperation penetrated the Emperor's stronghold and freed the prisoner who had been sustaining the Emperor's power for 3 centuries. But Revan emerged from captivity, split in ways that made him barely functional. The light side Revan wanted redemption and to stop the Emperor's galactic consumption ritual. The dark side Revan wanted revenge and was willing to destroy everything to achieve it. The two halves fought each other as much as they fought external enemies, making Revan simultaneously incredibly dangerous and largely ineffective. Eventually, the Emperor's physical form was destroyed in combat on Drummond Cassus, but death had become meaningless to a being who had transcended mortality thousands of years ago. His consciousness simply moved to a new host body he had prepared, continuing his plans with barely a pause. The galaxy celebrated his apparent death, believing the immortal Emperor had finally been defeated. Another premature victory celebration. Another failure to understand that beings like the Emperor did not die in conventional ways. His ultimate plan continued developing in secret, pieces moving into position across centuries, waiting for the moment when he would consume everything and everyone, transforming the galaxy into a lifeless void while he ascended to godhood. The eventual permanent destruction of the Sith Emperor came not through military might, but through something he had never adequately understood despite his millennia of existence: sacrifice. The willingness of individuals to give everything, including their lives, to protect others without expecting reward or recognition. The Outlander, a being whose identity varied depending on which path through history was followed, became the focal point for forces opposing both the Sith Empire and the Emperor's eternal empire of Zakuul. Through a series of conflicts that reshaped galactic politics, the Outlander gathered allies from impossible places: Sith and Jedi working together, Republic soldiers and Imperial officers coordinating strategies, ancient enemies united by the recognition that the Emperor's plans threatened everyone equally. When the Emperor was finally destroyed permanently, his consciousness torn apart by combined force techniques that prevented any resurrection or host body transfer, the galaxy entered a period of adjustment. The true Sith Empire, having existed for over 3,000 years, did not simply collapse but rather fragmented into competing factions that would eventually become problems for future generations. But for the moment, the immediate existential threat had passed. The galaxy could focus on recovery and rebuilding rather than simple survival. The Republic, however, had been fundamentally weakened by centuries of conflict. The Senate had become corrupt, more interested in personal power and corporate profits than effective governance. Outer Rim worlds felt abandoned, their concerns ignored by core world politicians who saw them as resource extraction points rather than citizens deserving equal representation. This corruption and neglect created the conditions for the new Sith Wars, a period of near-constant conflict that would last 2,000 years. Unlike previous Sith threats that came from unified empires, the new Sith Wars featured dozens of competing Sith factions, each claiming to be the true inheritors of ancient traditions, each fighting not just the Republic but also each other. The catalyst was a fallen Jedi named Phineas, who took the Sith name Darth Revan. He was a philosopher first and warrior second, believing that the Jedi Order had lost its way by rejecting emotion and attachment. His arguments were sophisticated enough that he convinced other Jedi to join him, creating a schism that echoed the first Great Schism thousands of years earlier. Revan traveled to the unknown regions and discovered remnants of the old Sith Empire, descendants of those who had fled after the Emperor's apparent first death. These groups had maintained Sith traditions in isolation, practicing dark side techniques without the structure or purpose that had defined previous Sith civilizations. Revan unified them through a combination of philosophical appeal and demonstration of superior power. He created what he called the new Sith Empire, but it lacked the centralized control that had characterized previous Sith governments. Multiple Dark Lords held roughly equal power, constantly competing for dominance, while nominally cooperating against the Republic. This internal competition was simultaneously the new Sith Empire's greatest strength and fatal weakness. Sith Lords pushed each other to greater heights of power through constant rivalry, but they also undermined each other's campaigns, assassinated promising commanders out of jealousy, and diverted resources to personal vendettas rather than strategic objectives. For 2 millennia the war ground on with no clear victor. Planets changed hands repeatedly. Governments rose and fell. Entire populations were displaced or destroyed. The Jedi Order found itself militarized in ways that fundamentally changed its nature, with Jedi spending more time as generals than as peacekeepers or scholars. The Republic's territory shrank steadily as systems either fell to Sith conquest or simply declared independence, unwilling to continue supporting a government that could not protect them. By the year 1000 before the Battle of Yavin, the Republic controlled less than half the territory it had held at the new Sith War's beginning. The final major battle took place on Ruusan, a small world with no particular strategic value that became symbolically important when both sides decided it would be the site where the conflict finally ended. Lord Kyan led the Brotherhood of Darkness, the latest and largest Sith organization, commanding an army that included hundreds of Sith Lords and thousands of dark side apprentices and warriors. Opposing him was the Jedi Army of Light, led by Lord Hoth, a charismatic general who had united scattered Jedi forces into a cohesive military organization. For a full year, the two armies clashed on Ruusan's surface in battles that devastated the planet's ecology and killed tens of thousands on both sides. Neither force could achieve decisive victory. The Sith had superior numbers, but the Jedi had better coordination and supply lines. Every major engagement ended in stalemate, with both sides taking heavy casualties and retreating to regroup before attacking again. Khorne's mental state deteriorated under the pressure of command and the constant backstabbing from rival Sith Lords within his own army. He became convinced that only a superweapon could break the stalemate. In desperation, he turned to a Sith holocron that described an ancient technique called the thought bomb. The device was not a physical weapon, but a force technique of immense power. When activated, it would create an explosion that existed primarily in the Force rather than physical space. Any Force-sensitive being caught in its radius would have their consciousness torn from their body and trapped in a suspended state, neither alive nor dead, aware but unable to act or escape. Khorne believed, or perhaps simply convinced himself, that the thought bomb could be tuned to only affect Jedi, leaving his Sith forces unharmed. He gathered the most powerful Sith Lords in the Brotherhood and convinced them to participate in the ritual that would create and detonate the weapon. They were wrong about its selectivity. When the thought bomb detonated, it killed every Force-sensitive being on Ruusan regardless of allegiance. Hundreds of Jedi died instantly, their spirits trapped in what would become known as the Valley of the Jedi. And every single member of the Brotherhood of Darkness perished, including Kayan himself, realizing too late that he had been deceived by the holocron's incomplete information. Only one Sith survived. Darth Bane had been mining cortosis ore in deep underground caverns when the thought bomb detonated, far enough below the surface that the Force explosion did not reach him. He emerged from the mines to find both armies dead. The 1,000-year war ended in a single catastrophic moment. Bane surveyed the devastation and reached a conclusion that would reshape Sith philosophy for the next millennium. The Sith had failed not because they were weaker than the Jedi, but because they were their own worst enemies. Every time Sith grew numerous, they turned on each other. Rivalry became more important than defeating the Jedi. Personal ambition undermined collective goals. The solution was radical. Bane decided there should only ever be two Sith at any given time. One master to embody power, and one apprentice to crave it. The master would train the apprentice in every technique, every secret, holding nothing back. And when the apprentice grew strong enough to kill the master, that would prove the apprentice worthy of becoming the new master and taking their own apprentice. This rule of two would ensure that Sith power concentrated rather than diluted. Each generation would be stronger than the previous because the weak were eliminated through natural selection. And with only 2 Sith existing in secret, the Jedi would believe their ancient enemy extinct, allowing the Sith to manipulate galactic events from the shadows without facing constant opposition. Bane traveled to Lehon, the ancient Rakata homeworld, seeking holocrons and texts that might have survived in the ruins there. What he found exceeded his expectations. Darth Revan had left a holocron specifically designed to be found by future Sith, containing not just techniques but philosophy about patience and long-term planning. Revan's teachings emphasized that the Sith's goal should not be open conquest but corruption from within. Let the Republic appear to thrive while slowly undermining its foundations. Let the Jedi seem strong while creating conditions that would make them vulnerable. Victory measured in centuries rather than years. Bane absorbed these lessons and made them the foundation of his new Sith Order. He took an apprentice, a woman named Darth Zana, who had survived the Battle of Ruusan as a child. He taught her everything, knowing that if she could not eventually kill him, she was not worthy to carry the Sith legacy forward. Years later, she succeeded. Their final duel ended with Bane's death, and Zana becoming the new master. She took her own apprentice, continuing the cycle. Each generation of Sith worked in absolute secrecy, infiltrating Republic institutions, accumulating wealth and influence, preparing for a distant future when all the pieces would finally be in position. The Jedi declared total victory after Ruusan. They genuinely believed the Sith were extinct this time. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The Brotherhood of Darkness was destroyed. No Sith had been encountered since. Surely, after 1,000 years of constant warfare, the threat had finally been eliminated. The Republic underwent massive reorganization in what became known as the Ruusan Reformation. The military was demilitarized. Massive armies disbanded. The Jedi returned to their role as peacekeepers, rather than generals. The Senate implemented reforms designed to prevent the kind of corruption that had weakened the government during the Long War. For 1,000 years, peace reigned, or what appeared to be peace. Beneath the surface, invisible to almost everyone, the Sith lineage continued, master and apprentice working in secret, each generation more patient and more subtle than the last. Darth Bane became Darth Zana, became Darth Cognos, became a succession of names known only to each other and carefully hidden from galactic awareness. They accumulated resources. They studied the Republic's weaknesses. They infiltrated key institutions. They prepared for the day when the grand plan would finally reach fruition. By the time Darth Plagueis took an apprentice named Sheev Palpatine, the Sith had spent a millennium positioning themselves for the final move. Everything was ready. The pieces were in place. And the Jedi, convinced that the Sith were extinct, had no idea that the greatest threat in their history was about to make its move. Darth Plagueis was unlike any Sith Lord who had come before him. Where others focused on combat prowess or political manipulation, Plagueis dedicated himself to understanding the scientific foundations of the Force itself. He was a Muun, a species known for financial acumen and logical thinking, and he approached the dark side, not with passion, but with the methodical precision of a researcher conducting experiments. His obsession centered on one question that had haunted every mortal being since consciousness first emerged. Could death itself be defeated? Not through Sith rituals that preserved spirits in temples or techniques that allowed consciousness to jump between host bodies, but true immortality, where a single body could be sustained indefinitely through manipulation of midi-chlorians at the cellular level. Plagueis established hidden laboratories across the galaxy, where he conducted experiments that would have horrified even other dark side users. He studied the midi-chlorians, the microscopic organisms that lived in all cells and connected living beings to the Force. Through dark side techniques combined with cutting-edge science, he learned to influence these organisms directly, commanding them to repair damage, halt aging processes, even generate new life where none had existed before. His experiments bore fruit in ways that suggested he had achieved the impossible. Plagueis could extend his own life indefinitely. He could heal injuries that should have been fatal. And in his most ambitious work, he attempted to create life itself through pure manipulation of midichlorians, forcing them to form a living being without requiring biological parents. The Force itself reacted to this violation. Plagueis felt the pushback, a resistance that suggested he was touching something that should not be touched, but he interpreted this as confirmation that he was on the right path. If the Force resisted, that meant he was approaching fundamental truths that existence itself wanted to keep hidden. He took an apprentice named Sheev Palpatine, recognizing in the young human from Naboo something rare: the ability to embrace the dark side completely while maintaining perfect outward appearance of normalcy. Palpatine could stand in a room full of Jedi, and none would sense the corruption within him. This level of control was exactly what the final phase of the Sith's thousand-year plan required. Palpatine's training was unlike anything previous Sith apprentices had experienced. Plagueis taught him not just Force techniques but political strategy, economic manipulation, social engineering. The modern galaxy was not conquered through armies but through control of institutions, through shaping the rules that governed trillions of lives. Their relationship was different from typical master and apprentice dynamics. Plagueis genuinely believed they could both achieve immortality, that the rule of two could evolve beyond its requirement for the apprentice to eventually kill the master. If both could live forever, they could rule the galaxy together eternally. Palpatine learned everything his master taught. And then, on the night when Plagueis finally believed his work was complete, when the Sith Lord had drunk too much in celebration of their impending victory, Palpatine struck. He used Force lightning to kill his master, while the older being was too intoxicated to defend himself properly. Plagueis died confused, unable to understand why his apprentice would betray him when immortality was within reach for both of them. He failed to grasp that Palpatine had no interest in sharing power with anyone, that the younger Sith had studied his master's techniques and concluded they were incomplete, that true mastery meant being the sole authority. The irony was perfect. Plagueis the Wise, who had learned to save others from death, could not save himself. But Plagueis's experiments had consequences neither he nor Palpatine fully understood. The Force, pushed and prodded and violated by attempts to create life artificially, generated a response. On the desert world of Tatooine, a slave woman named Shmi Skywalker became pregnant despite having no partner, no intimate contact with anyone. The child growing within her had been conceived by the Force itself, a reaction to Plagueis's manipulations. Anakin Skywalker was born with a midichlorian count that broke every instrument used to measure such things. He could see things before they happened. His reflexes were beyond human possibility. His connection to the Force was so powerful that simply being near him made other Force sensitives uncomfortable, like standing too close to a fusion reactor. The Jedi had prophecies about a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force, destroying the Sith and restoring equilibrium. When Qui-Gon Jinn discovered Anakin, he immediately believed this slave boy was that prophesied savior. The council was less certain. The prophecies were vague, open to interpretation, possibly metaphorical rather than literal. But Qui-Gon's conviction was absolute. He freed Anakin from slavery and brought him to Coruscant, determined that the boy would be trained as a Jedi, regardless of the council's hesitation. The Masters sensed something troubling in Anakin, a darkness mixed with the light, fear and anger coexisting with compassion and love. During the Naboo crisis, when Trade Federation forces blockaded the peaceful planet in a dispute over taxation of trade routes, Qui-Gon and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi were sent to negotiate. They quickly discovered the conflict was more complex than a simple trade disagreement. The Federation was taking orders from a mysterious Sith Lord, the first Sith encountered by the Jedi Order in 1,000 years. The revelation should have prompted immediate investigation, should have made the Council question everything they believed about the Sith's extinction. But the crisis demanded immediate action, and deeper questions were postponed in favor of resolving the immediate threat. Darth Maul, Sidious's assassin and tool rather than true apprentice, killed Qui-Gon during the Battle of Naboo. Obi-Wan defeated Maul in turn, cutting the Zabrak warrior in half and sending him falling down a reactor shaft. The immediate Sith threat seemed ended, though the mysterious master remained unidentified and at large. With his dying breath, Qui-Gon made Obi-Wan promise to train Anakin. The Council reluctantly agreed, sensing that refusing would create resentment and potentially drive the boy toward darkness through rejection. But they imposed conditions. Obi-Wan, barely a Jedi Knight himself, would be responsible for training perhaps the most powerful Force-sensitive ever born. The relationship between master and student was complicated from the beginning. Obi-Wan was cautious and methodical, emphasizing patience and adherence to the code. Anakin was impulsive and emotional, frustrated by rules that seemed designed to restrict rather than guide. He loved deeply, feared loss intensely, and carried anger at the injustices he had witnessed during his years as a slave. Palpatine, now Supreme Chancellor, after the Naboo crisis elevated him to galactic prominence, took special interest in Anakin's development. He positioned himself as a mentor figure, someone who praised the boy's abilities without the constant criticism and restraint that characterized Jedi teaching. Where the Council saw dangerous potential that needed to be controlled, Palpatine saw exactly what he wanted, an immensely powerful Force user with emotional vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The Clone Wars, when they began, seemed to emerge from legitimate political grievances. Thousands of systems had grown dissatisfied with the Republic's corruption and inefficiency. They united under Count Dooku, a former Jedi Master who had left the Order due to philosophical differences with the Council. What the galaxy did not know was that Dooku was Darth Tyrannus, Palpatine's new apprentice after Maul's apparent death. The Separatist crisis was manufactured, designed to create exactly the kind of galactic conflict that would allow Palpatine to accumulate emergency powers while positioning the Jedi as military leaders rather than peacekeepers. The clone army's discovery on Kamino appeared to be miraculous timing. The Republic needed soldiers immediately, and here was a fully trained and equipped army, ordered a decade earlier by a Jedi Master who had since died under mysterious circumstances. The Senate authorized their use without thorough investigation, too desperate to question the gift fortune had apparently provided. Palpatine controlled both sides of the war. As Chancellor, he commanded the Republic military and directed overall strategy. As Darth Sidious, he gave orders to Dooku and the Separatist leaders, ensuring the conflict remained balanced. Neither side could achieve decisive victory because the same mind was preventing both from winning. Every battle served multiple purposes. The Jedi were spread thin across the galaxy, becoming generals and warriors, forgetting how to be diplomats and seekers of wisdom. The Senate granted Palpatine more authority with each crisis, dismantling democratic safeguards in the name of security, and Anakin, fighting on the front lines and praised as the Republic's greatest hero, grew closer to Palpatine and more distant from Jedi teachings. The war lasted 3 years, long enough to fundamentally transform the Republic into something that only resembled democracy superficially. The institutions that had protected freedom for 25,000 years were hollow now, their real power transferred to the Chancellor's office through a series of emergency measures that everyone assumed would be temporary. Anakin married Padme Amidala in secret, violating the Jedi prohibition against attachment. His fear of losing her became an obsession that Palpatine carefully cultivated. When Anakin began having visions of Padme dying in childbirth, visions that Palpatine had likely planted through Force manipulation, the trap was fully set. Everything the Sith had built over 1,000 years, Every careful manipulation and patient preparation came down to this moment. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One prophesied to destroy the Sith, stood at a crossroads. On one side was the Jedi Order with their rules and restrictions and their inability to promise they could save Padme. On the other was Palpatine, offering forbidden knowledge and claiming he could teach techniques that would prevent death itself. The choice Anakin made would reshape the galaxy and fulfill the prophecy in ways no one had anticipated. The beginning of the end came with a battle above Coruscant. Separatist forces, in their boldest move of the war, attacked the Republic capital directly and kidnapped Chancellor Palpatine. The assault was suicide for most of the Separatist fleet, exactly as Palpatine had planned when he ordered Dooku to execute the operation. The goal was not military victory, but creating the precise situation needed for the next phase. Anakin and Obi-Wan led the rescue mission, fighting through waves of droid fighters to reach the flagship where Palpatine was supposedly being held prisoner. They found the Chancellor restrained in a chair, guarded by Count Dooku, who engaged them in a lightsaber duel that seemed evenly matched until Anakin channeled his anger and fear into a surge of dark side power. Dooku fell, disarmed and defeated, brought to his knees with Anakin's lightsaber pressed against his neck. The Count expected his master to intervene, to reveal the truth and welcome Anakin into their Sith partnership. Instead, Palpatine urged Anakin to kill the defenseless prisoner. Anakin hesitated. Executing a defeated enemy was not the Jedi way, but Palpatine's voice was insistent, reminding him of the Separatist atrocities, of the millions dead because of Dooku's leadership, of justice that needed to be served, and beneath the logical arguments was something else, a subtle force manipulation that made the killing seem not just acceptable but necessary. The lightsaber flashed, Dooku's head fell, and Anakin crossed a threshold he could never return from. He had murdered a helpless prisoner at a politician's urging, prioritizing revenge over mercy, letting fear and anger guide his actions instead of the serenity the Jedi Code demanded. But he rationalized it instantly. Dooku deserved death. The galaxy was safer with him gone. This was justice, not murder. The mental gymnastics were flawless, the self-deception complete. When they returned to Coruscant, Anakin found Padme waiting with news that filled him with joy and terror in equal measure. She was pregnant. They were going to have a child, a family, everything he had dreamed of since leaving his mother on Tatooine. But that joy was immediately poisoned by visions that had begun haunting his sleep. He saw Padme dying in childbirth, saw her gasping for breath, saying his name, reaching for him as life left her eyes. The visions had the terrible clarity that sometimes preceded actual events, the same quality his dreams had possessed before his mother died. He had failed to save Shmi. He would not fail again. Palpatine sensed Anakin's desperation and moved carefully. He did not immediately reveal himself, but instead began a series of conversations that seemed like philosophical discussions. They attended an opera together, watching a Mon Calamari ballet, while Palpatine told the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord so powerful he could influence midi-chlorians to create life and prevent death. The story was true in its essential details, but false in its implications. Palpatine presented it as ancient history, as legend, carefully avoiding any connection to himself. But the hook was set. Anakin now knew that preventing death was theoretically possible through dark-side techniques that the Jedi either did not know or refused to teach. When Palpatine finally revealed his true identity, when he stood before Anakin and declared himself Darth Sidious, the moment was engineered perfectly. Anakin's first instinct was to arrest the Sith Lord, to report this immediately to the Jedi Council. But Palpatine did not fight or flee. He simply asked Anakin to consider what the Jedi would do. They would try to kill Palpatine, eliminating the only person who knew the techniques that could save Padme. They would do it in the name of justice and protecting the Republic. never considering that their rigid adherence to rules might cost an innocent woman her life. Was that truly justice, or was it dogma elevated above compassion? Anakin reported to Mace Windu, telling the stern master that Palpatine was the Sith Lord they had been seeking. Windu ordered Anakin to remain at the Jedi Temple while he led a strike team to arrest the Chancellor. The order was meant to protect Anakin, to keep him away from a confrontation with a Sith Lord when he was emotionally compromised. Instead, it gave Anakin time to agonize over his choice. If Windu killed Palpatine, the knowledge of how to save Padme died with him. If he let Palpatine live, he was choosing a Sith Lord over the Jedi Order. Either way, he betrayed someone or something he cared about. The confrontation in the Chancellor's office happened exactly as Palpatine had foreseen. Windu proved himself the superior duelist, disarming Sidious and preparing to deliver the killing blow. The Sith Lord unleashed Force lightning, but Windu reflected it back with his lightsaber, scarring Palpatine's face and revealing the corruption that had always existed beneath the kindly politician's facade. Anakin arrived as Windu raised his lightsaber for the execution. Palpatine begged for mercy, claimed he was too weak, pleaded for Anakin to stop the Jedi's murder of an unarmed prisoner. The hypocrisy was staggering, given that Anakin had killed Dooku in an identical situation just days earlier, but desperation made him blind to the parallel. Windu declared that Palpatine was too dangerous to be kept alive, that the Sith Lord's control over the Senate made a trial impossible. It was true, and it was also exactly the kind of extrajudicial execution that violated everything the Jedi claimed to stand for. In that moment, Windu proved Palpatine's arguments about Jedi hypocrisy, about their willingness to break their own rules when convenient. Anakin moved without conscious thought, his lightsaber cutting through Windu's wrist before the Jedi Master could strike. Palpatine surged forward, lightning pouring from his hands, blasting Windu through the window and sending him falling hundreds of stories to his death. The room fell silent, except for Anakin's ragged breathing. He looked at his hand, at the lightsaber that had just killed a Jedi Master. He had crossed beyond any possibility of redemption. Now, the Jedi Order would execute him for this betrayal. His only choice was to commit completely to the path he had started. Palpatine did not gloat. He simply offered what he had promised. Learn the dark side techniques. Save Padme. Accept the title of Darth Vader and become powerful enough that no one could ever take away the people you loved. Vader's first assignment was to lead the 501st Legion to the Jedi Temple. The clone troopers, completely loyal and unquestioning due to inhibitor chips in their brains, followed their general without hesitation. They stormed through the temple, killing every Jedi they encountered. Masters who had fought in the Clone Wars were gunned down by the soldiers they had commanded. Padawans were executed before they could reach their lightsabers. Vader himself hunted through the temple, his lightsaber blue, but his soul irrevocably corrupted. He found younglings hiding in the council chambers, children who barely understood what was happening, who recognized Anakin Skywalker and thought they were being rescued. One asked what they should do with so many Jedi dead, where they should go to be safe. Vader ignited his lightsaber in response. If there was any fragment of Anakin remaining at that point, it drowned beneath the dark side's demands. These children were Jedi. The Jedi had to be destroyed. Therefore, these children had to die. The logic was airtight if you accepted its foundational premise. Simultaneously across the galaxy, Order 66 was transmitted to every clone trooper unit. The inhibitor chips activated, overriding free will and compassion, transforming loyal soldiers into executioners. Jedi generals who had fought beside these men for years were shot in the back without warning or hesitation. Ki-Adi-Mundi, leading troops on Maijito, was struck down by the soldiers marching behind him. Adila Secura, rallying her forces on Felucia, was killed by Commander Bly and his squad. Plo Koon's starfighter, was shot down over Cato Nemoidia by his own wingmen. Across hundreds of worlds, the pattern repeated. The Jedi Order, spread thin by their role as military commanders, was decimated in hours. Only Obi-Wan and Yoda survived of the council members, warned by the Force and able to fight their way to safety. They made their way back to Coruscant, finding the temple burning and bodies everywhere. The beacon that called Jedi home was broadcasting a warning to stay away, manipulated by the Sith to lure any survivors into a trap. Obi-Wan accessed the security recordings, watching in horror as Anakin led the assault. His brother, his friend, the man he had trained and fought beside for over a decade, slaughtering younglings and betraying everything they had both sworn to protect. Yoda confronted Palpatine in the Senate chamber, while Obi-Wan tracked Anakin to Mustafar, where the newly christened Darth Vader was executing the separatist leadership. The war was ending, but not through Republic victory. It was ending because both sides had served their purpose and were now being eliminated by the one who had controlled them all along. Padme had followed Obi-Wan to Mustafar, desperate to understand what had happened to her husband. When she confronted Vader, he was already lost in delusion and rage. He claimed he had done everything for her, killed Jedi and younglings to gain the power to save her. He offered to overthrow Palpatine and rule the galaxy together, genuinely believing this was what she wanted. Her rejection, her horror at what he had become, shattered something in him. When Obi-Wan emerged from her ship, Vader became convinced she had betrayed him, that she had brought his former master to kill him. The Force choke was instinctive, rage channeled into power without conscious thought. He released her only when Obi-Wan shouted, but the damage was done. The duel that followed was personal in ways that transcended the larger conflict. Obi-Wan fought defensively, still trying to reach his former Padawan even as his lightsaber parried killing strikes. Vader attacked with pure hatred, every movement designed to hurt the man who he believed had turned Padme against him. They fought across the lava facility, through control rooms and over precarious platforms. Obi-Wan held the defensive high ground above a lava flow, pleading with Vader to stop. The arrogance that had always been Anakin's weakness made Vader believe he could overcome any advantage through pure power. He leaped. Obi-Wan's blade flashed once. Both of Vader's legs and his remaining biological arm fell away, leaving him helpless on a lava bank with his robes catching fire. Obi-Wan took Anakin's lightsaber and walked away, unable to deliver the killing blow to someone he had loved as a brother. Behind him, Vader screamed his hatred, the fire consuming what remained of his body while his connection to the Force paradoxically grew stronger, fueled by agony and rage. Palpatine arrived minutes later, sensing his new apprentice's suffering. He encased Vader in a black life support suit that would keep him alive, but in constant pain. The breathing apparatus was deliberately uncomfortable. The prosthetic limbs were functional but inferior to modern cybernetics. Every moment of Vader's existence would hurt, and that pain would feed his dark side power indefinitely. When Vader awakened in the suit, his first question was about Padme. Palpatine told him the truth in the cruelest way possible. She had died. The medical droids could not save her, and according to their analysis, she had lost the will to live. In Vader's mind, corrupted by dark side thinking, this became confirmation of his worst fear. She had died because of him, because he had choked her, because his fall to darkness had broken her heart. The scream that followed was not entirely metaphorical. The force wave that exploded from Vader's anguish shattered equipment and cracked walls. His power had grown exponentially, but the cost was everything he had claimed to be fighting for. Padme died giving birth to twins, Luke and Leia, telling Obi-Wan with her last breath that there was still good in Anakin, that somehow he could be redeemed. The children were separated for their protection. Luke went to Tatooine, raised by Anakin's step-family. Leia went to Alderaan, adopted by Senator Bail Organa. On Coruscant, Palpatine addressed the Senate and declared the formation of the Galactic Empire. Democracy had failed, he explained. The Separatist crisis and the Jedi's treacherous attempt to assassinate him proved that the old system was broken. For security and stability, the Republic would be reorganized into an empire with himself as emperor. The Senate applauded. They cheered the end of democracy, too frightened and manipulated to recognize what they had just accepted. Padme, dying light years away, whispered the words that perfectly captured the moment. This was how liberty died, with thunderous applause. The Sith had won. Their 1,000-year plan had succeeded beyond even Darth Bane's ambitious vision. The Jedi were destroyed. The Republic was transformed into a dictatorship, and the Chosen One had become the enforcer of Sith will. The prophecy had been twisted but not broken. Anakin Skywalker would bring balance to the Force, but not in the way anyone had anticipated. And that reckoning was still decades away, waiting for the day when his children would force him to choose between the dark side he had embraced and the faint memory of the man he had been. The first decades of the Empire were defined by consolidation and terror. Palpatine, now openly ruling as both Emperor and Sith Lord, systematically dismantled every institution that might pose a threat to his absolute authority. The Senate continued to exist but was stripped of real power, reduced to a ceremonial body that rubber-stamped imperial decrees. Planetary governors, answerable only to the Emperor, replaced democratic systems with authoritarian control. The Jedi survivors faced the darkest period in their Order's 25,000-year history. Scattered and hunted, they could not communicate safely or organize any kind of resistance. The Inquisitorius, Palpatine's force of fallen Jedi, turned dark side assassins, tracked them across the galaxy with terrifying efficiency. The Grand Inquisitor, once a Jedi temple guard, led this group with fanatical dedication. He had witnessed the Order's corruption from within, seen masters make political compromises and bend their principles when convenient. His fall to the dark side was not seduction but disgust, a genuine belief that the Jedi had betrayed their own ideals and deserved destruction. Among those who survived were individuals whose stories would become legends whispered in the shadows. Kanan Jarrus, who had been a Padawan during Order 66, lived as a smuggler and drifter, hiding his Force abilities and trying to forget he had ever been a Jedi. Ahsoka Tano, who had left the Order before its destruction, operated as a rebel intelligence agent under the codename Fulcrum. Cal Kestis, another Padawan survivor, worked as a scrapper until circumstances forced him back into conflict with the Empire. These survivors did not mount any coordinated resistance. They simply tried to stay alive while occasionally helping people when the risks seemed manageable. The Jedi Order, once numbering 10,000, was reduced to perhaps 100 scattered individuals who had no way of knowing how many others had survived. Vader hunted them obsessively. Each Jedi he killed was another piece of his old identity destroyed, another confirmation that Anakin Skywalker was truly dead, and only Darth Vader remained. The pain of his suit, constant and unrelenting, fueled his power and his hatred. He became exactly what Palpatine wanted, a weapon that would never stop, never question, never rest. But even in darkness, fragments of Anakin persisted. When Vader learned that the pilot who destroyed the Death Star was named Skywalker, when he sensed through the Force that this boy was his son, something shifted. The certainty that everything he loved had died because of his choices cracked slightly. Luke Skywalker's discovery of his heritage came gradually. Obi-Wan told him a sanitized version of the truth, claiming that Darth Vader had betrayed and murdered his father rather than that they were the same person. The lie was understandable given the circumstances, but it created complications that would nearly prove catastrophic when the full truth emerged. Luke's training on Dagobah with Yoda was rushed, incomplete by necessity. The ancient Jedi Master was dying. his 900 years finally catching up with him. He taught Luke what he could in the limited time available, but there were gaps in the instruction, questions left unanswered. The revelation in Cloud City, when Vader offered Luke the chance to rule the galaxy together as father and son, shattered Luke's understanding of himself and his destiny. Everything Obi-Wan had told him was lies, at least about this most fundamental fact. His father was not a fallen hero but the galaxy's most feared enforcer of tyranny. Luke's refusal to join Vader, his choice to fall to apparent death rather than embrace the dark side, demonstrated something that neither Jedi nor Sith had adequately understood. The power to resist corruption came not from suppressing emotion but from accepting it while choosing to act with compassion anyway. Luke loved his father while hating what he had become, and that complexity gave him strength rather than weakness. The year between Cloud City and Endor saw Luke mature into something new. He was not a Jedi in the traditional sense, having received only fragmentary training, but he had learned from his father's mistakes, from Obi-Wan's regrets, from Yoda's warnings. He understood that the light side was not about eliminating emotion, but about letting love and compassion guide your actions, despite fear and anger. When he returned to Dagobah and learned that Leia was his sister, the implications were staggering. Vader's children had both survived, hidden from him for decades, now both key figures in the rebellion. The revelation explained Luke's instinctive trust of Leia, the connection they had felt without understanding its source. Yoda's final words emphasized that Luke's training was not truly complete until he confronted Vader again. Not to kill him, but to understand that there were some battles that could not be won through violence. Sometimes the greatest courage lay in refusing to fight. Obi-Wan's Force ghost tried to convince Luke that Vader had to die, that Anakin was gone beyond any hope of recovery. But Luke rejected this teaching, demonstrating growth beyond his instructors. If the light side represented hope and compassion, then there had to be hope even for someone as far gone as Darth Vader. The Battle of Endor was designed by the Empire as a trap for the rebellion. The second Death Star was partially operational, defended by a fleet larger than anything the rebels could match, and the Emperor himself was present, using the battle as bait to draw Luke to him. Luke surrendered to Vader willingly, brought aboard the Death Star to face Palpatine. The Emperor's plan was elegant in its simplicity. He would force Luke to choose between killing Vader to save the rebellion or joining the dark side to save his father. Either way, Palpatine gained a powerful apprentice while demonstrating that the light side's principles were impractical fantasies. The duel between father and son was emotional rather than technical. Vader probed Luke's defenses, searching for weaknesses. When he discovered Luke's concern for Leia, when he suggested that perhaps she could be turned if Luke refused, something broke in the young Jedi. The rage that followed was primal. Luke attacked with pure fury, overwhelming Vader through sheer aggressive power. He cut off Vader's mechanical hand, leaving his father helpless on the ground. The Emperor urged him to complete his fall, to kill Vader and take his place. Luke looked at his own mechanical hand, the one Vader had severed on Cloud City. He saw his father's mechanical hand lying nearby. He recognized the parallel, understood that he was seconds away from becoming exactly what he was fighting against. He deactivated his lightsaber and turned to face the Emperor. His declaration was simple and absolute. He would never turn to the dark side. He was a Jedi, like his father before him. Palpatine's response was immediate. Force lightning poured from his hands, not to kill quickly, but to torture. Luke writhed in agony, while the Emperor laughed, explaining that if he would not be turned, he would die. Vader watched his son dying, his master cackling in triumph. Palpatine had promised him power, had claimed they would rule together. Instead, he had been a tool, useful only as long as he served the Emperor's purposes. Now Palpatine was replacing him, killing his son while Vader stood by helplessly. The choice Vader made in that moment rewrote everything. He grabbed Palpatine, ignoring the lightning coursing through his own systems, and lifted the Emperor over his head. For a few seconds, Master and Apprentice were locked in that absurd position, the most powerful Sith Lord in history being manhandled by his broken, conflicted enforcer. Then Vader threw him. Palpatine fell down the reactor shaft, his lightning intensifying as he dropped, detonating in an explosion that shook the entire station when he reached the bottom. Vader collapsed, his life support systems fatally damaged by the lightning. Luke dragged him toward an evacuation ship, but they both knew there was no time. Vader asked Luke to remove his helmet, to let him see his son with his own eyes just once. Luke refused at first, knowing that removing the helmet would kill him faster. But Vader insisted. He had lived behind a mask for decades, hidden from the world and from himself. He wanted to die as Anakin Skywalker, not as Darth Vader. The face revealed when Luke removed the helmet was scarred and pale, barely human after decades of relying on the suit. But the eyes were clear, lucid, free from the yellow tint of dark side corruption. Anakin told Luke that he had been right, that there had been good in him after all, that Luke had saved him. The moment of redemption was brief. Anakin died in his son's arms, his body too damaged to survive without the suit's support. But his spirit, finally released from the dark side's grip, merged with the Force rather than being consumed by it. He appeared alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda as a Force ghost, redeemed and at peace despite everything he had done. Luke burned Vader's armor on a funeral pyre on Endor. The suit that had imprisoned his father for so long was reduced to ash and smoke rising into the night sky. The rebellion celebrated their victory, the second Death Star destroyed and the Emperor dead. But the galaxy's recovery from 20 years of tyranny would not be quick or simple. The Empire did not collapse overnight. Warlords and governors carved out their own territories, each claiming to be the legitimate continuation of Palpatine's vision. The Battle of Jakku, fought a year after Endor, marked the last major engagement between Imperial remnants and New Republic forces. The desert planet became a graveyard of star destroyers, their wreckage half buried in sand as monuments to fallen empire. The New Republic, established with Mon Mothma as its first chancellor, tried to learn from the old Republic's mistakes. They reduced the military dramatically, believing that a large standing army invited the kind of militarization that had enabled Palpatine's rise. They decentralized power, giving member worlds more autonomy. These reforms were well-intentioned, but created vulnerabilities that future threats would exploit. Luke Skywalker faced perhaps the most daunting task of all, rebuilding the Jedi Order from almost nothing. He established his academy on Yavin 4, the same moon where Exar Kun had fallen to darkness 4,000 years earlier. The location was symbolic, a reclamation of a dark side nexus for the light. His first students included some with unusual backgrounds. Kip Duron had been imprisoned in the spice mines of Kessel since childhood, his Force abilities untrained but powerful. Koran Horn came from a law enforcement background, bringing a practical perspective that traditional Jedi often lacked. And Mara Jade, once the Emperor's hand and personal assassin, sought redemption for the years she spent serving darkness. Luke's philosophy for the New Order differed fundamentally from the old. He allowed attachments, recognizing that love had saved his father when dogma would have demanded execution. He did not recruit infants, but accepted students of all ages, understanding that being raised outside the Order could provide perspective rather than simply creating risks. He taught that emotion was natural and healthy as long as compassion guided your actions. The challenges came quickly. Exar Kun's spirit, imprisoned in the temples for 4 millennia, awakened when Luke's students began training there. The ancient Sith Lord attempted to corrupt or destroy the new Jedi, seeing them as weak imitations of the Order he had once belonged to. The students, working together under Luke's guidance, managed to destroy Khan's consciousness permanently, finally ending a threat that had endured since the Great Sith War. Luke himself faced tests that pushed his understanding of the Force beyond anything Yoda or Obi-Wan had taught him. He learned that the galaxy was more complex than simple light versus dark, that there were Force traditions outside the Jedi-Sith dichotomy, that the Force itself might have purposes that transcended any one philosophy. His marriage to Mara Jade was controversial among some who clung to old Jedi traditions, but it demonstrated the New Order's commitment to different principles. They built a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding, proving that attachment did not inevitably lead to possessive fear. The Thrawn campaign, led by the last Grand Admiral of the Empire, nearly succeeded in destroying the New Republic through military brilliance rather than force powers or superweapons. Thrawn's ability to understand cultures through their art made him a strategist who could predict enemy actions with unsettling accuracy. His defeat came not through superior force, but through the betrayal of his own bodyguard, demonstrating that even genius could not overcome fundamental moral rot. As the galaxy slowly stabilized, as the New Republic grew stronger and the Jedi Order expanded, there was cautious optimism that perhaps the cycle had finally been broken. The Sith were truly gone this time, destroyed not just militarily, but philosophically. The Empire's remnants were scattered and diminishing. Democracy was being rebuilt with safeguards against the kind of corruption that had enabled Palpatine's rise. But the Force had other plans. The Yuuzhan Vong invasion, when it came, would test everything the New Republic and New Jedi Order had built, forcing them to confront questions about the nature of life, the Force, and what it meant to be a guardian of peace in a galaxy that seemed determined to tear itself apart. The Yuuzhan Vong arrived from beyond the galaxy's edge in the 25th year after the Battle of Yavin. They were unlike any enemy the New Republic had ever faced. Their biology was completely divorced from the Force, making them invisible to Jedi senses. Their technology was organic rather than mechanical, ships and weapons grown from living creatures rather than constructed from metal and circuits, and their philosophy embraced pain and suffering as paths to enlightenment, making them fundamentally incompatible with both Jedi and Sith worldviews. The invasion united former enemies in ways that previous conflicts had not. Imperial remnant forces fought alongside New Republic fleets. Jedi worked with Imperial Knights, a force-using order that had emerged in former Imperial space. Species that had warred against each other for generations coordinated their defenses against the extra-galactic threat. The war was brutal and transformative. Trillions died as the Vong conquered world after world, terraforming planets to suit their aesthetic preferences and enslaving populations that survived the initial attacks. Coruscant itself fell, the galactic capital for 25,000 years, transformed into a Vong worldship covered in organic architecture that pulsed with alien life. The younger generation stepped forward during this crisis. Jacen and Jaina Solo, Han and Leia's twin children, demonstrated abilities that went beyond traditional Jedi training. Anakin Solo, their younger brother, sacrificed himself on a mission to destroy Vong cloning facilities, his death inspiring others to continue fighting when despair seemed more rational than hope. The Vong's disconnection from the Force was not natural, but punishment. Long ago their homeworld had been alive, connected to the Force in ways most planets were not. The Vong had waged war against their own planet, seeing its influence over them as slavery rather than symbiosis. When they finally killed their world, the Force itself recoiled, severing the species from connection permanently. This revelation changed the nature of the conflict. The Vong were not conquerors seeking resources, but refugees fleeing consequences of their own actions, searching for a new living world to replace what they had destroyed. Understanding their motivation did not excuse their atrocities, but it provided context that made eventual peace negotiations possible. The war ended, not with total Vong defeat, but with compromise. The living planet Zonama Sekot, mobile and sentient, offered itself as a new home for the Vong. In exchange, they would end their invasion and attempt to rebuild their culture without the self-destructive patterns that had defined them for millennia. The galaxy reorganized itself into the Galactic Alliance, a federation structure that balanced New Republic ideals with recognition that the old systems had been vulnerable to the kind of conquest the Vong had nearly achieved. Member worlds maintained significant autonomy, but committed to mutual defense and coordinated response to major threats. Luke's Jedi Order had been tested by the Vong War in ways that revealed both strengths and weaknesses. The flexibility he had built into the Order allowed for creative responses to unprecedented challenges, but the lack of rigid structure also meant that individual Jedi sometimes pursued contradictory goals, creating conflicts that a more centralized order might have avoided. Jacen Solo's journey exemplified these contradictions. During the war, he had studied with numerous Force traditions beyond the Jedi, learning from Sith holocrons and dark side practitioners in attempts to understand the Force more completely. His intentions were good, his desire to prevent future conflicts genuine, but the path he walked led him exactly where such paths always led. Years after the Vong War, Jacen fell to the dark side and took the Sith name Darth Caedus. His reasoning was sophisticated, built on complex philosophical arguments about ends justifying means and the necessity of authoritarian control to prevent chaos. But underneath the intellectual justification was the same fear that had motivated every Sith Lord throughout history. Fear of loss, fear of helplessness, fear that manifested as hunger for absolute control. His reign as a Sith Lord was brief and destructive. The difference from previous Sith was that resistance came immediately from people who loved him. His twin sister Jaina hunted him not as an enemy but as family, seeking to stop him before he could inflict the kind of galaxy-spanning damage that Vader or Palpatine had achieved. Their final duel ended with Jacey's death, his last words an apology and recognition that he had been wrong. The pattern had repeated, but on a smaller scale, contained by people who acted quickly rather than letting corruption spread unchecked. It was not victory over the dark side, but rather acceptance that the struggle would never truly end, that each generation would face the same fundamental choices between fear and love, control and trust, power and compassion. In the Legacy era, more than a century after the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy continued its complex dance. Cade Skywalker, descendant of Luke and Anakin, inherited extraordinary Force potential along with trauma that made him reject his heritage entirely. He became a bounty hunter and spice addict, running from destiny and responsibility. A new Sith Order emerged under Darth Krayt, but with philosophy evolved from Bane's rule of two. Krayt established the rule of one, where many Sith could exist, but all served a single unified vision rather than competing against each other. It was an attempt to fix the internal conflict that had destroyed previous Sith organizations while maintaining dark side power structures. Cade eventually accepted his heritage and helped defeat Krayt's order, demonstrating that even generations removed from Luke and Anakin, the Skywalker tendency toward dramatic redemption and last-minute heroics remained strong. Throughout all these eras, certain truths remained constant. The Force flowed through all living things, unchanging and eternal. Light and dark were aspects of that Force, not separate entities, but parts of a whole. Beings could choose which aspect to serve, but the choice was never permanent, never final. Redemption was always possible until death, and sometimes beyond. The Jedi archives, rebuilt multiple times after various catastrophes, preserved records of these cycles. Young Padawans studied ancient conflicts, learning that the names and faces changed, but the fundamental struggles remained consistent. Pride led to arrogance. Fear led to anger. Attachment without compassion led to possessive control, but also hope endured through darkness. Love proved stronger than hatred. Sacrifice redeemed even the most fallen. As our journey through 25,000 years reaches its end, the galaxy continues onward into futures unwritten. New species emerge and join galactic civilization. Old conflicts fade into history, while new challenges arise to test each generation. Coruscant's cityscape stretches across the planet's entire surface, a monument to persistence and rebuilding. Levels built on levels built on levels, reaching down kilometers to foundations laid before the Republic existed. The Jedi Temple, destroyed and rebuilt multiple times, stands again, its spires reaching toward stars that have witnessed everything. On Tatooine, the twin suns set as they have for billions of years, painting the desert in oranges and golds. The Lars homestead still stands, weathered by time but maintained by those who understand its significance. Here the Chosen One grew up, dreaming of stars he would eventually darken before his son brought him back to light. Yavin 4's jungles have reclaimed most of the Massassi temples. Vines grow through ancient stone, trees push through cracks in foundations. The dark side presence that once dominated the moon has faded to barely perceptible echoes. Students at Luke's Academy sleep peacefully in dormitories built among the ruins, learning from the past without being trapped by it. Endor's forest moon celebrates with fires that honor both victory and sacrifice. Ewoks pass down stories of the great battle, each generation adding embellishments but maintaining core truths. The second Death Star's debris fell across the moon, metal fragments slowly being absorbed by the forest ecosystem, transformed from weapons into shelter and tools. On worlds across the galaxy, people sleep under stars they name in their own languages, pursuing lives that have nothing to do with force powers or galactic conflicts. Farmers worry about harvests. Artists create beauty for its own sake. Children play games that have been played in various forms for millennia. This ordinary life, peaceful and unremarkable, is what all the great struggles ultimately serve to protect. The Force ghosts of those who sacrificed everything watch over it all. Anakin Skywalker stands beside his son Luke, his grandson Ben, the entire lineage stretching forward through time. Obi-Wan Kenobi observes with satisfaction tinged with sadness for what was lost along the way. Yoda, ancient even in death, understands that the patterns will continue long after everyone he knew has faded completely. They do not intervene in daily affairs. Their time for direct action has passed, but they remain available to offer guidance when needed. Proof that the Force preserves consciousness and that death is transformation rather than ending. Space itself is peaceful tonight. Hyperspace lanes carry merchant vessels and passenger transports. Stations orbit planets, facilitating trade and communication. Fleets patrol borders against pirates and smugglers rather than existential threats. It is not permanent peace, because such things do not exist in a galaxy of trillions pursuing individual goals and desires, but it is peace enough. The story we have traced together, from the Celestials who shaped hyperspace to Cade Skywalker hunting bounties in the Legacy era, is both complete and unfinished. Complete because we have witnessed the major cycles, the rises and falls, the lessons learned and forgotten, and learned again. Unfinished because the galaxy continues, because new stories unfold every day, because the Force does not stop flowing, just because we have finished recounting history. You have traveled through 25,000 years tonight. You have witnessed empires rise from nothing and crumble to dust. You have seen heroes become villains, and villains find redemption. You have learned that the Force is neither light nor dark, but both, that balance is not achieved once, but must be continually chosen, that the struggle between fear and love plays out in every heart, across every generation. As you drift towards sleep, let the weight of that history settle around you like a comfortable blanket. Let the voices of ancient Jedi and Sith fade into peaceful silence. Let the sounds of lightsabers and starship engines quiet to nothing. The galaxy spins onward through space, beautiful and terrible and full of possibility. The Force is with you. It always has been. It always will be. And in that connection, in that certainty, find the peace that allows dreams to come and consciousness to rest. Thank you for joining this journey through legends. May the Force be with you tonight and always.